Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Jams and Tea Podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And today, we are going to be talking about two brand new records. We are going to be talking about two hotly anticipated records, the top-rated albums on Rate Your Music, coincidentally enough, this week. We are going to be talking about Black Midi's Cavalcade. We are going to be joined for that discussion by our guest this week, one Miss Adequate Emily.
Hello, I am here. I am a person, and I am on the podcast. Hello.
Hello.
Emily makes fantastic
I just realized I don't need to face
YouTube
my
videos.
mic while talking.
You get used to it, honestly. The more you do it, the more you'll just have to be like, how do I... But we are going to be talking about that with her. Please go check out her content. We are going to link her channel in the description of this video.
I make YouTube videos. I'm still not used to it.
It's good shit. I've watched that dance video. It's good.
Yeah. Bowler. So yes.
I'm just dancing. It's fine.
And the second album we're going to be talking about afterwards
helpful.
is Sweet Trip's new album. It's got like a 15-word title.
A tiny house is the first line, and then there's
secret speeches, polar equals.
Exactly.
In Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth 3 or something.
pretty long album title. It's just In Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth 3.
Good
Love
Apollo.
it.
Sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. A tiny house in secret speeches, polar equals is a very easy album title to remember, and I totally didn't just Google it to say it.
It absolutely just rolls off the tongue.
Almost as good as a Good Apollo and Burning Star 4 Volume 1 from Fear Through the Eyes of Madness.
Jesus
yeah.
Christ.
Almost as easy
What's
as that.
What's that Chumbawamba album? The boy bands have one.
Oh, I can't remember what it's called. But
Yeah.
I know what you mean.
I have the whole thing in front of me, and I realized if I said it, it would take 3 minutes and ruin the entire podcast.
Yeah.
Fiona Apple, you're nothing.
Yeah.
That's what they beat for the longest album titles, and I believe they just needed to fuck over Fiona Apple.
Incredible. Okay,
Decent
so
marketing strategy. Yeah, we're going to start off this week, as we do, with our What We Have Been Listening to This Week segment, where we talk about things we've been listening to this week. And technically, the everybody from normal episodes we had to skip last week. Unfortunately, we've kept you fed with that good, wholesome content anyway. But we have been listening to lots of things, so we will talk about them.
Mhm. Jake, what have you been listening to?
Acronym order. Okay, let's go. I have a couple really, really big listens for me personally, and I'll save those to last, as is our wont. I will say I gave, and just because I'm going back to redo my Topster because I'm a fucking nerd and I'm listening to a bunch of my favorite albums just sort of at my whim. Yesterday I listened to Against Me's Transgender Dysphoria Blues. Favorite album. Yeah, you're spitting. We have done an entire B-sides episode. It's, I mean, it might be.
Tube and Butterfly tops it for me.
It's fucking lit. I cried in the stockroom again. It's fine.
And like, we've been going for a year. Transgender Dysphoria Blues is currently the 15th highest rated album we've ever covered.
Yes, we did our Against Me B-sides. One of my favorite.
Sorry, did someone
B-sides
not give it a
episodes
10? And who should I beat up for that?
I think that might. Who was that?
I'm sure I gave it like a 9. I think I gave it a really high
I was gonna
rating.
say, because you were the weirdo who had Searching for a Form of Clarity as your favorite Against Me album, and
Yeah.
I'm just like,
Well,
you
so
might
That
be
is a
able
good
to
album.
me
I don't think they
personally.
have a bad
It
album,
is.
but that.
No.
I mean, over
It was Tyler. Tyler gave it a 9.
over Axl
It was
Rose,
him.
though? Come
Kill
on.
him.
Yeah, so we did do a really good episode on the discography of Against Me, where we bitterly disagreed which album was the best one, but in a friendly way, because we liked all of them except for A New Wave. But you know, less said about that album, the better.
Hot take,
should be.
everyone except for White Crosses is great, and even White Crosses is just like slightly less good
White
than the other
Crosses
ones.
is a banger. I am the,
There's some
I am
good
the
stuff
White
on there,
Crosses
but
apologist.
I will say I did see them live during their tour where they were doing the two albums. Like one night was Searching for a Form of Clarity and New Wave, and the other night was White Crosses and Dysphoria Blues. I'm gonna be honest, as much as I really enjoyed the performance of White Crosses, it was really just a lead up to performing Transgender Dysphoria Blues, because they play like 5 songs from White Crosses, and then they were like, all right, here's the entire album of Transgender Dysphoria Blues.
Yeah, those first, not to demean the other tracks, of course, but just like in terms of a 1-2 opening punch, Transgender Dysphoria Blues has 2 of the best intro tracks in music, and I would
argue that title track might have been the best song of the decade. It was like there was like a 3-song race when I made like a little top 10 songs of the 2010s for me, and it was like Blacker the Berry, Transgender Dysphoria Blues, and Settle Down by Kimbra. Because I think that's just a bop.
Going back a little bit more, I listened to an album that I have just like has been on my radar for a long time that I just never listened to in full for whatever fucking reason, and I'm not sure why, and that would be the Unicorns, Who Will Cut Our Hair When We're Gone. Really fucking fun, noisy indie rock album that's just like really raucous and fun and kind of silly, but also every song is just kind of a banger. Like there's no real structure to any of those songs, like save for like 3 or 4 of them maybe have like a sort of traditional chorus verse chorus, but like it's just such a strange album where I'm just like, I don't really like, I should think this is weird and gimmicky and whatever, and then I just get to fucking Tough Ghost and I'm like, such a fucking banger, and it's good. Everybody says that album is fantastic, and I can only agree with them. After that, I'll say I listened to my first Kraftwerk album. Tyler sort of prompted this. I listened to Europa Express. Is that what it's called? Europa Express.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes, and that was great. I really, really enjoyed that. I'd only known a song on that album, Hall of Mirrors, because it was featured on an episode of Mr. Robot that I liked a lot. And then I was just like, I should really listen to this album because, of course, like, I take a look at Kraftwerk's albums and it's just, you look at the descriptors on like aggregate sites and it's just like, this is a favorite band of Tyler's. And then lo and behold, you were just like, yeah, my dad played me Kraftwerk when I was an infant. And I was just like, yeah, okay. I have to check this.
When I was in the womb.
The little like the womb.
Getting the CD up there was a big hassle.
Apologies to your mother.
I mean, the CD, much less than the boombox. You know,
oh no,
it's just it was real. It was a challenge.
Yeah, no, my dad has all the Kraftwerk CDs, and they're a big part of my childhood. And I'm glad you enjoyed that album. And yeah. It's
very good. I will check out further ones per your recommendation. I also listened to via a tweet that apparently let me know that all of my followers have great taste because it got a weird amount of engagement, was the fact that I've started really properly getting into Kate Bush. And I re-listened to something like Hounds of Love, which I loved before. Spoiler alert, it is still one of the best albums ever made. And yes, Running Up That Hill might be overplayed, but is it still not the best song ever?
It simply is not overplayed.
You're right. I heard that song in Walmart once and I was just like, go off, Queen.
I mean, it is a great song. I will say Cloud Bursting might be even better.
I love Cloud Bursting.
You should be allowed to say that.
The Kate Bush album that I want to shout out, though, actually, is I listen to a bit of as I like to listen to some Dark Horse picks. I listened to her most recent album, her 2011 album, 50 Words for Snow, which is great. Like, oh my God. I like it. It had a decently like high score and whatnot. You know, it's late era Kate Bush. How bad can it be? And I just listened to it and I was just sort of taken aback. It was just like, hey, do you want to hear Kate Bush do Vespertine? And it's like, well, yeah, actually, I would love that. And it's like, well, here you go.
The blueprint.
She was indeed.
It's kind of like Kate Bush's Joanna Newsom album, is the way I think about it, because it has like really
it's a narrative.
Yeah, exactly. It's really narrative based and it's incredibly lyrically focused. And there's like 12, 13-minute songs on it. Not 12, 13-minute songs.
She may or may not fuck a snowman in it.
Yeah, she does.
May or may not.
She fucks a snowman.
Yeah. She does indeed fuck a snowman.
Yeah. And you know what?
Say that like it's a bad thing.
She's allowed to do that. She makes an album every 10 years at this point, and if she wants to fuck a snowman on one of the songs,
and that was 2011. So Kate, Drop a new one.
That little motherfucker from Frozen, just having the time of his life.
Oh no. That is the most cursed image you've ever brought forth into this world.
You brought it forth. Everybody's
What makes you
thinking
think of?
I take no responsibility.
I was thinking of Michael Keaton
remember-
and Jack Frost.
Oh God, that's so much worse than
no!
what I was thinking
Boom.
of.
Boom. You made it worse.
I was just thinking of that image from r/LSD where it's just a picture of an Olaf doll and it just says Ogloff. And it's just a close up on this knockoff Olaf doll.
I have seen that image more times than I can count and laughed every time. Oh
Deep breaths.
Christ.
Deep breaths.
That's peak comedy.
My last thing here, I will say, it leads into something we'll talk about later, obviously, but I have fallen in love officially with Sweet Trip, which I had not listened to before, and then this week listened to their discography of 4 entire albums. But good God, holy fucking shit, Velocity Design Comfort is good. Holy shit. Their other albums are also fantastic, but that's not what I want to mention. The big one, the big listen for me these past 2 weeks that I've been spinning on repeat fucking constantly. I went out and drove like a long distance just to listen to this so I could blast it at fucking full volume the whole way through. The War on Drugs, A Deeper Understanding. Holy shit. 2017 Jake was a fucking moron. He was just like, yeah, this album's like fine and stuff, but it was just like, I don't know, something about the airiness of the production and fucking Adam Granduciel's weird Bob Dylan-y voice just didn't hit me then. And then now I get to the second half of Pain and I'm just like, oh God, I want to die. And then the whole album is just like driving off into an orange sunset. Like oh God, it's an album that is longer than an hour, and I would not cut a fucking second of it. I love it, and it makes me cry for reasons I don't even entirely understand.
Homie just plays the guitar, and you're like, oh my God.
It's one of those
I
records.
can describe
like,
so many albums for me.
it's one of those records. One of those records like Steely Dan's Asia or Steven Wilson's Hand Cannot Erase, where it's like an audiophile's wet dream.
Oh,
like,
the Flax. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
You put it on and you're just like, okay, this is the best anything has ever sounded.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know I'm late to the party on that one, but good God. Good God.
Anyway.
Favorite album I've listened to this year, new album I've listened to this year so far. So.
Baller. All right. August, what have you been listening to?
Well, what I've been listening to first off was from French-Canadian band Harmonium, their album Les Cinq Saisons, or The 5 Seasons. This is a really interesting kind of mid-70s fusion of progressive rock and traditional folk music. It's very laid back. There's like basically no drums. The production of it is immaculate. The sound of the bass in particular is something that works incredibly well for this album. And it's just 5 really good, well done tracks. And I have to absolutely recommend it. It's really not like outside of Canada, I don't think it's too well known, but it's...
What's the band called?
Harmonium.
Harmonium, okay.
Kind of on my binge of some more classic records, I listened to an important debut. The Doors is self-titled. It's pretty good, you know.
Yeah, it's solid.
Solid record, obviously predominantly featured and made, not made popular, it was popular before. I'm talking out of my ass. Apocalypse Now, that's what it was in.
Yes.
Can't believe the Doors didn't do anything for 12 years.
Yeah.
Hang on.
What happened to those guys?
What happened?
Door
wait.
fellas.
Oh, wait.
I'd like to speak to Mr.
just to be-
Door.
Apocalypse Now popularized the Apocalypse Now popularized the Doors, but Jim Morrison died in 71.
The Doors, as popularized by the Oliver Stone film, The Doors.
Yeah.
Uh,
No.
not Oliver Stone.
Yeah,
that.
I look.
My favorite Doors member is Francis Ford Coppola.
It was a slip of the tongue. That's all I'm going to say, but it was nonetheless hilarious. I get it. It's funny.
I apologize.
Damn Albarn.
I am bullying.
No, that's what this podcast is
I've been
all
on
about.
this podcast for 20 minutes. I'm already being unfairly mean to people that I have just met.
Don't worry.
August
This
having-
podcast will do that to you.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Morgan called
I get it.
Tyler a
It's
prison-eyed
funny.
bastard on the first episode.
Oh yeah.
August.
I think I called him a cunt the last episode.
That's just
August
that's
currently
just
having his,
natural.
it's funny.
Are
I
you
get
really-
it. Damon Albarn moment?
Yeah.
Are you really friends if you don't call your friend a cunt at one point? Like,
No.
I don't know. It depends on if they're being cunty or not.
August, your feelings on the Doors self-titled
Yeah.
album.
Oh, I said it was good.
I want
It's
to
good.
say that if you listen, I know you only give it a 6, but if you want to listen to another Doors record, the best Doors album that I never hear anyone calling the best Doors album is LA Woman, which is I think the last album they made when
What a
Jim Morrison
Tyler
was,
pick.
was alive. But that album is dope
Yeah.
as shit. That's a really good album. It's got Riders on the Storm on it, so that's all you need.
Yeah. Next thing, Pearl Jam 10. Not gonna talk about it because we're gonna talk about it later. Other than it's great. Moving on.
You enjoying
I'm not going to
10
be
just
talking
makes me
about it,
so
so I will
happy.
just say that it is awesome, and anyone who doesn't like it is wrong.
Yeah, you're gonna fit right in.
I grew up on grunge in a way. Like I mean, I was born in 1999, so I didn't get to hear it like when it came out. But my dad would listen to the alternative station, which would just play like White Stripes and 90s grunge. And so I fell in love with all those bands. So like there's like a childhood element to it, but also the fact that all those albums slap and like are some of them are pretty underappreciated in my opinion. Like Super Unknown deserves more hype, but 10 gets all the respect it deserves. Like it really does deserve that much hype.
You're only saying true things.
Though I will also say that Nevermind is still the better of the 1991 grunge albums.
Oh well, there we go. Okay.
No,
Morgan
no.
sitting there with a
Come on.
card.
You were doing so
No.
well, Emily.
All right, we're kicking her off. She's done. No more.
They're both masterpieces.
This
It's
is-
just Nevermind's my second favorite album of all time.
This is the only podcast on the internet that would give you grief for preferring Nirvana, quite frankly.
Look,
It's-
I feel you, Emily. I'm the biggest Nirvana fan of the podcast, generally speaking. So
I was gonna say
I'll back you up.
Tyler and Saoirse will definitely go to bat for Nirvana, whereas Morgan and I are contrarian assholes. Nevermind is the best one though. It's good. I like it.
I'm
Kurt
here,
Cobain
though.
is like, just one of my favorite songwriters easily.
It's a good choice, to be fair.
Yeah. Anyway, August.
Anyway,
yeah, hot take. Nevermind is good.
next
What?
thing, from a band some people on this podcast like, a band other people do not like, Yola Tango, never mind. No, Painful. That's it. No, fucking hell. Stupid ass
brother.
grunge.
Who the fuck doesn't like Yola Tango?
I don't know. I
Tyler,
just said it to say it.
We are going to
frankly.
beat you to death.
I will come to your country.
Do it, bitch. You won't.
I would love that.
I like the idea of turning a threat into like a welcoming invitation. Just like, I'm gonna find you. Like, good, we'll have a nice time.
Gonna come to
Wow.
Nebraska.
Morgan,
Take
Morgan will
by
say
Wes
some.
Anderson.
Morgan will drop some awful take about an album I love. I'll just come to the US and we'll just end up having angry sex.
I was gonna say like have a beer or something, but you know, whatever.
I got invited on here. Things are about to get queer, even more queer fast.
There is not a straight member of this podcast.
No,
That's
there isn't.
true.
I know, but I just bring it up on an extra level.
It's just
Please.
math.
Hey,
I think people
August,
just
what
wanna
you think
see-
of Painful?
Painful's a good album. It's best moments are the first and last song because they're just too good to top. But I also like other moments on it. I think I've listened to not the whole album, but songs off it for the past 3 nights before I've went to bed. That should tell you how I'm feeling. Happy, of course.
You're gonna be like me, and you're probably gonna dig on, and then nothing turned itself inside out. I think so.
I've been thinking about this all week, Jake, and I think you're right. I think that's the one because that's like the most nocturnal record.
Come to the
and
dark side.
But also just want to say on the note of Yola Tingo that the closing track on Painful, I Heard You Looking, is a 7-minute guitar solo, and it is my favorite personal guitar solo of all time.
He's pretty lit.
Yeah. Last thing, and maybe my favorite thing I listened to the whole week, coming at us from 1969, a country rock staple, the Flying Burrito Brothers, The Gilded Palace of Sin.
Oh yeah, I know about them because of Vince Gilligan.
This album is, if you listen to it once, you may just think it's stupid and corny and the lyrics suck and you'll never listen to it again. But I trust me, this is an album worth your time because really sinking into it and getting into the emotion and heart of what Graham Pearson is singing about on this record and just getting into the atmosphere of it is entirely worth the experience because it just becomes like miserable in the very best way possible. And obviously it was a real genesis for a lot of country rock and country to follow. So it's important for the historical elements of it too, and also the fact that there's a Frank Zappa connection on this album, which of course I like.
And
that's how you found the album.
There it is.
That being the first song, Christine's Tune, is about the lady who was on the front cover of Hot Rats.
Oh, okay.
Delightful.
Who is consequently also in the background of this album's cover, standing next to a disheveled barn.
Amazing.
Yeah, this album's only 37 minutes, so I'm gonna give this a listen.
Yeah,
Amazing.
you should, because it's good. That's been my week.
Yeah, that
Morgan.
goes to Morgan. Acronym go.
I gave a first listen to Peter Gabriel's second record, Scratch, which real good. I enjoyed that a lot on the air in particular, like just yes.
That's
Daddy Peter.
That's like the weakest of his 4 self-titled albums, in my opinion. But I completely agree with you. It's a really good record, all the same.
I preferred it to Car. I don't really have any reason for that.
That's fair. Car, I think, is one of those records that just really kind of gets by on the strength of like its biggest songs, like Salisbury Hill, obviously. But yeah, I think Melt and Security are the best of the self-titled records, and then Car and Scratch. But I mean, they've all got
Did
like
you say it hit you like a sledgehammer?
well.
I wanna be
Just
sledgehammer. My name.
we actually
Watch
just
your 30th anniversary of Sledgehammer.
35th.
So,
yeah.
Yes, we just put out an episode about
I was just about to say, we just put out a video where we celebrated Peter Gabriel's So. So that is apropos.
Yeah.
So many O sounds in that sentence. I can't deal with it.
So apropos.
I will also mention the 2 new releases that we were going to cover last week and then didn't.
Yes.
One of which is Olivia Rodrigo's Sour, which I thought was middling overall. But you know, it's got some great stuff on it. I look forward to seeing what she does next. Because I think there's a lot here, and I think we'll really be on to something once she has some life experience.
I'll ride for the song Deja Vu. I really like that song. I think it's the best song on the
Yes,
record.
good.
It's great.
Not even gonna
and she
front.
hits
I've
the
played Brutal multiple times this week.
Brutal's great too.
Yeah. One of the things about Deja
I-
Vu is like she hits some sort of Ariana Grande type major sevenths at the end of the chorus, and it's hitting the high notes of it. And it's not like the music is doing that. She is hitting the notes that make the chords what they are, and it's just beautiful.
It's just an absurdly talented vocalist that Disney ate.
Yum.
At any rate, I also listened to 21 Pilots' Scaled and Icy, which is the worst fucking album of the year.
Yeah.
Just
is this where I admit that I had a pretty heavy 21 Pilots phase like 6 years ago or so?
Everyone
I was really into them at the beginning.
Yeah.
Like
I still think there's some great tracks on Blurry Face and that first self-titled album, and I think they're good. And Trench got critical acclaim,
Trench
even though
cool.
it basically just sounded like Blurry Face to me again, but still good. Like I do not get why people hated Blurry Face but like Trench, like they sound very similar to me.
Yeah, they're the same way.
But like, yeah, even fans, when I saw like this album came out, like even fans were like, okay, this is when you have like a stan fan base, and even they're like, okay,
Yeah.
not a great sign.
It's just such a boring record.
It's just so completely, utterly vapid and useless. It reminds me a lot of the Logic record from last year, which is not a good thing.
The thing about Scaled and Icy that I found sort of interesting about it in terms of it being a failure is that it's basically their quarantine album, right? It's like they're doing something more low key because because quarantine, bleh, right? So, and the title was like supposed to be cute, right? It's supposed to be shortening of Scale, Back, and Isolated in terms of like how they approached making the record. But the thing is,
I thought they were really into dragons. I thought they were scalies.
Well, that is on the album cover. But the reason that doesn't work is, I mean, aside from the fact that the songs are just duty, the reason it doesn't work is that 21 Pilots are interesting when they're being like really wacky and weird and like really throwing everything into their music. Like they're doing stuff that's really like over the top, and sometimes it falls over, but it's always like at least interesting, even if it is bad. Whereas the thing about Scaled and Icy is it's not even bad in an interesting way.
Like,
I'm just laughing at Jake just freaking out in the corner, realizing that I just called 21 Pilots scalies.
Okay, it was that in combination with Tyler, who's easily the most verbose member of this podcast, just said that they were duty.
That fucking ethered me.
I
just been laughing as everyone else is just normal, and Jake's just dying for a minute.
It happens more often than you'd think.
I was not normal. It must be said. I was.
Wow.
Oh.
One question.
I
have one question. What's a scaly?
Oh no. Fuck.
Tyler, that is a particular subgenre
dragon furries.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is it like furries for? I was gonna say furries for.
One of my best friends in high school was the scaly.
Good, good for them. Love is love.
Oh no.
No, actually not.
It's fine.
I like how you were saying something really profound, and we're just laughing like crazy. Because I just can't look at the top of the Zoom call without seeing Jake flipping out.
Anyway, Morgan, you were saying, what have you been listening to?
My stomach hurts.
No, I'm done. That was it.
Saoirse, what have you been listening to?
Thought you were frozen.
So, I was trying to do the Simpsons meme where it's Lisa just going like.
What's that guy on TikTok who just like he just hops into Omegle and he just stares at the camera and goes, "Wake up." Wake up, like it's like a glitch in the Matrix.
But I would just start by giving my own take on the Olivia Rodrigo album Sour, which is the thing is like I think about albums made by Disney stars and it's like inauthentic machine produced crap. Even when they're trying to rebel against her image, it sounds like machine produced crap, right? And then I listened to Olivia Rodrigo record, and it's like the first song is directly about what it's like to be controlled by the machine of Disney, and I feel like it's made by a human being who has like something to say with their album, and that's just pretty neat, I think.
As someone who broadly agreed with you on that album, I have to say it's the same thing as Billie Eilish with me, in that it's like the industry and kind of brought them up and made them sound really like shiny and whatnot, but I still, behind the expensive production, feel an actual voice behind it, and that's why I like it.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm with you there.
That said, would I have lost it if it featured Jake Paul because they were on the same Disney show? Yes, absolutely. That would have been hysterical.
No,
yeah,
I would have given the album.
If we would have actually reviewed the album, I would not have just brought up that Jake Paul was in the show. Is that her show was about being in Jake Paul's hype house, which is
I didn't even realize
that sounds like the Michael Jackson documentary. Oh my god,
that show on the whole, from what I know about it, feels deeply irresponsible.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's fine.
I mean, most Disney shows do in a way. Like, it's weird. Like, I grew up on them, but like, you look at how many of them like just feel like the fact that they put so much emphasis on their stars is very creepy in a way. Like, it's weird. Like something like Cartoon Network, like I guess because they're not on camera a lot, they can't do it as much, but like they have child actors and they just don't push them like that. And I feel like that's much better. The only time I've seen that happen was, I believe, the voice actor for Jake, or not Jake, sorry, Finn from Adventure Time.
Oh.
Finn from Adventure Time got like his own like sketch show, but like that was it. And like I think after a while he was just like, I'm a kid, I'm just gonna do whatever I want. Like the fact that Disney like pushes out these people into these weird star like positions clearly is not good for them. It is really like messing up like their perception of how to handle the world, because they are only viewing it through the idea of a PR lens, and they're only viewing it through the idea of being controlled by something around them. And that's just not a healthy way of dealing with things, especially because like once they get past the thing where they're the property of a channel, they get the freedom back and they don't know what to do with it anymore. That's terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, it fundamentally rewires those people's brains, especially since they're in such early development stages when all of that happens.
That's why I understand not digging the like debut album from someone like Olivia Rodrigo, is that there's inevitably that kind of darkness that lurks into the, you can't get like escape the corporate notions of it, and it just might feel a little too much for you. So I think that bleeds into the music in a.
I was away.
So I get it.
I think that
I was gonna say I was away when this conversation started, but did Demi Lovato come up? Because that seems to me to be the most obvious instance of what you're talking about.
Yeah,
that is a great example.
Mm-hmm. And the great thing about the Lovato thing is
Lindsay Lohan as well.
Yeah, well, so many Disney stars have gone into music, and Demi Lovato especially is a great example of someone who is actively trying to change their image with their music, but it just sounds like it's produced by the same machine. Whereas I feel like what Liv Rodrigo's done is
cool for the summer, still a bop though.
I fucking we're talking about Demi Lovato now. Can we move on?
Well, I just think it's smart that they opened Sour with a song about being like a Disney stooge and what that feels like, I guess. Whereas it's mostly a breakup record. Otherwise, I listened to my new favorite Flamin' Lips record, that being The Terror.
Fine. Yes, let's go. Yes.
Which, let me just say this: the title refers to the idea of the terror that merely love is not enough to be happy, and the fear that engenders in the writers of the album. And my God's had all over this strange, hypnagogic, strangely electronic mood piece that's over an hour long.
Bleak album.
Yeah. Some of the songs are very long, and that's fine. You just feel like you're sitting in this emotional state and rocking yourself back and forth with a bourbon, slowly crying.
Yeah. I think I've done that while listening to that, actually.
What makes that album
enough.
so effective is that is a bizarre look for the Flaming Lips, right? Like there's eccentric, fun, frankly ridiculous band.
They
And
made a song for SpongeBob.
they did, and that song fucking slaps.
That whole album is a slap.
Yeah, I had that album.
Wilco's on there.
Wilco's on exactly.
Fucking
Motorhead is on that album.
Oh my
with
God.
an original song for the SpongeBob movie, and it rips.
Although I will say the song that Wilco made for the album is a little weaker in hindsight, but still.
But yeah, anyway, so the Terror is great because it's like the Flaming Lips going full nuclear apocalypse, or nuclear apocalyptic dread anyway, and that's what makes it so awesome.
Yeah, and they've always been really good at soundscapes, but this feels like the soundscape is really at the center more than some of their other records. It's much more about sitting in the vibe. So to cover 2 in 1, I saw the famed controversial documentary filmmaker Nick Broomfield has a new movie coming out. And this reminded me of the fact his last movie was about the relationship between Lou Reed and Laurie Anderson. Although it ended up being more about him. But I ended up listening to both of their biggest records this week, that being Transformer and Big Science.
I saw your rating for Big Science on Radio Music, and I was so excited to hear you talk about it because that's an awesome record.
Yeah, like I was listening to it like, what? Finally, some good fucking food. Like, the things about Big Science is it's just never boring. Just so many. Like even something like Oh Superman, which is 8 minutes long, very subdued, and it's like the biggest hit on the record. But it's a slow build that's 8 minutes long, and you're just constantly engaged, like, where is this fucking going? And the textures are so interesting and enticing and exciting, and evocative. And it's doing all of this with instruments that are just and sounds that are just like plucked together out of the mind of someone who views the world in a completely unique way, and they'll just put together this like emotional tapestry with a sound. And I feel like if I did like LSD and sat in my bed with the lights off and listened to this album, I would see God. Like,
it is an incredible record, and Oh Superman is an incredible song in particular. It sounds like an AI that is learning to be human. It is a really strange and eerie and beautiful song that's also like quite devastating. Amazing.
And the use of spoken word on that song and the whole album is fascinating and really interesting. And like the way that it's like it breaks this real harmony with the spoken word of like baby talk of like, I'm your mother, or something like that. Like baby talk done by like Mother from the Alien movie, you know? Where it's just like deeply threatening.
It's more like, I would describe it as more like Spielberg's AI is the vibe that gets evoked when I listen to that song.
And Oh Superman has to be like one of the earliest like uses of vocoder in a song like that. Like that has to be an earlier one.
Yeah, Laurie Anderson was just such a pioneer in so many different ways. I was grateful to see. I saw her documentary Heart of a Dog that she put out a few years ago, which is kind of like just this collage of home movie stuff that she put together and then poetically edited and stuff. And it's very weird, and she's a very kind of eccentric person. But also she just has a way of communicating that's just very kind of beautiful and strange and entirely herself, and very idiosyncratic person, Laurie Anderson.
Yeah.
I'll take this was her the dog in Criterion?
I think so.
Yeah, it's in the Criterion Collection. Okay, I was right. I'm not going crazy.
I'll take this opportunity to say that there's a new movie out this month called Sisters with Transistors. It's a documentary about female women in the history of synth music. And I hear it's really worth checking out, so I recommend that. But Lou Reed's Transformer, like that's, we talked about Tapestry, and I felt a similar way that you all did to that, where it's like, wow, this is just song I know after song I already know. And they're all classics. Like, what do you want me to, like, this is the album with Perfect Day on it, and Walk on the Wild Side. What do you want me to say? It's the classic. It's Lou Reed's Transformer.
I think the funny thing I can mention about Transformer is a few months ago I went to go listen to Walk on the Wild Side. Partially because I had seen a tweet where someone said like something along the lines of like, man, Lou Reed talks about trans women a lot. Like I think maybe he might there might be something there. And I'm like, I'm not gonna go there. He's
well,
I'm not gonna speculate about someone's
the
gender after
original
they've
sapphic
died.
white boy.
I see the reading you're getting at there, but also Lou Reed's just the original chaser in music.
Listen, there's two paths. There's two paths in life.
Exactly.
Which way, Western man?
Wow.
But I went to go listen to Walk on the Wild Side.
You either die the trans woman or live long enough to see yourself become the chaser. Like,
I went to go listen to Walk on the Wild Side on YouTube, and I just scroll down to the comment section. I just see a comment that goes, "I'm here before the liberal PC police take this away." And I'm just like, do you know what this song is about?
You know who Lou Reed is?
She's been
like
sucking on my ding dong.
I was like the idea of like, yeah, political correctness really hates songs about trans women being awesome.
So I'll finish up by saying that I double billed Laurie Anderson's Big Science with a Morbid Stuff by Pup, which was a re-listen for me because I listened to the album when it came out. The 10th of 10s I've dropped since earlier that day when I listened to Big Science.
It's almost my favorite punk album of all time. If the Menzingers on the Impossible Past did not exist.
Man, would I not blame you? Just bangers from beginning to end with a lot of crying in between the head bops, you know. I like See At Your Funeral is a song that plays very differently now to when that song came out to me.
I love that song.
I know it's amazing. But that vibe of just like living well is the best revenge, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's the older you get, the more that song means, I think, you know.
I hope the world explodes. I hope that we all die. Maybe they'll play the highlights in hell.
Highlights in hell. I hope it's televised.
Oh God!
Wow. Scorpion Hill is still my favorite song on the record, though.
That's because it's great.
I was the only person with that opinion when that album came out, but
Up on Scorpion Hill.
It is my favorite.
Watch your life. Oh, that's great.
On the record too. I've always been more of a Dream Is Over person than Morbid Stuff.
I was gonna say that I prefer Dream Is Over, but they're both great albums. So like, am I gonna complain about either of someone liking one better? Like they're both bangers, and even though I think DVP is maybe the best song they've made, like that also doesn't diminish any song on Morbid Stuff.
Absolutely.
Like it's like, and like I bought a sports game last year because they all went on sale because of they're just like, well, nothing's happening and no one's gonna buy these games because nothing's going on. So I'm playing this NHL game and Bloody Mary, Kate, and Ashley comes on, and I'm like, okay, things are all right.
This is so fucking NHL weird.
There was like so many shit songs. There's
Amazing.
so many shit songs on that soundtrack, but like Pop came on and I was like, can you just play this song? Like, I don't need to hear the rest of the songs, just this one.
I have many fond memories of 2016, and one of them is driving at like an absolutely ludicrously illegal speed, listening to If This Tour Doesn't Kill You, I Will, going into DVP, and just like
such a good transition.
Yeah.
They
And just
roll right into each other.
Just barrels on. It's amazing. And I mean, we've been going for long enough on this segment anyway. Might as well start moving forward. But before we do though, it's only fair that Emily, we ask if you want to talk about anything,
especially because she flawlessly goes in to our name anagram.
Yeah, you do actually. Acronym. Yeah, you do. But have you been listening to anything recently that you want to shout out?
The other day, I don't know how it happened. I was listening to my playlist, and on shuffle, a song from Kid A came on, and I listened to both Kid A and Hail to the Thief. And I have to say, I am coming around on the idea that Kid A is the better between Hail to the Thief and Kid A. I know, controversial opinion, but like for the longest time, I was the one who came in through their rockier records. So I always liked Hail to the Thief's more rocky edge. They were both perfect to me for the longest time anyway. This is my favorite band after all. But I still insist that even though Kid A is better, Hail to the Thief deserves to be in the same conversation as Kid A in Rainbows and OK Computer as an album that is just 100% like all the songs hit. I don't get why people say it sounds disjointed. For me, it sounds perfect together. There's like an ebb and flow of like, it has that sort of Swans-esque quality of like soft, loud, soft, loud, soft, loud, but it fits for the theme of the idea of like chaos and misery. And it's just filled with great songs. Like 2 + 2 = 5 is like a top 5 Radiohead song for me.
Oh my God.
Punch Up at a Wedding is just a banger. I like some of the slower tracks too. Like I know it's a bit simple, but I do enjoy We Suck Young Blood in the
that's a great song.
It runs you over. I think it'd be worse on its own, but when you listen to it in the album, it sounds perfect.
So fucking weird.
Like, it has energy. Like it's a depressed energy in a way, because it's like an anger, but sometimes you need that energy. It's like if you extended the anger of electioneering to like an entire 50-minute runtime, and you need that sometimes. And I think it works in the sense that like every track donates this gigantic theme, and it all just becomes this united force on your senses.
Totally.
Here's a question though. Kid A or Amnesiac?
Kid A, but I do think I do enjoy Amnesiac. Obviously, like Radiohead's my favorite band. Like they're the band that got me into listening to albums as albums and not just like picking the songs. But like, I don't know, Kid A is just, I would say every song is perfect, but the title track's a little weak. But even then, like
nobody hasn't seen The Sopranos.
What a Morgan thing to say to that.
I will say I think that Hail to the Thief, as far as a Radiohead album can be underrated, that one is.
Yeah. I'm looking through here to see what else I was to. I mean, I've been trying to get into Cardiacs more because I discovered some of their songs, but I haven't listened to a full album yet. I listened to some of Seaside, and I just was like, I'm way too out of it to like digest this properly.
Exactly what happened to me. Exactly.
Emily, don't listen to Seaside. It's not one of their better records.
I was thinking to go in order. That was the only reason.
No, fair enough. The one you should start off with is Little Man in a House in the Whole World Window. That's the record I first heard of theirs, and that was a really good intro to their music.
I've heard definitely not Sing to God. I've heard a lot of people say Sing to God is
no
not a
build to that
intro.
Well, Sing to God is my second favorite album of all time, and it should not be the first Cardiacs record you listen to.
That's what
that's like getting into the Mars Volta by being like, hey, listen to Amputexture. Like, what? Why? No, don't do that.
I will say the reason I got into Cardiacs was I've been tweeting about it for a bit because I have a friend who introduced me before I even was like really deep into like a lot of more like obscure music, like introduced me to The Residents. Like I was like talking to her and I'm like, oh, the one concert I've been to is the Foo Fighters. She's like, cool. This is my favorite concert. And she sent me Constantinople. And I was like, this is too much for me. But like they become a band I enjoy a lot now. And I was looking up like, what are some of the bands they influenced? Like I wanted to like, because the story behind them is just wild to tell to people. And I was like trying to explain like, you could make a great like video essay on them like easily like that. And I'm surprised no one's doing it. And you see Cardiacs there and I go, well, no one really likes Cardiacs. I haven't listened to anything by them, but I have people who swear by them. They swear by Sing to God. Let me just look up like one of their songs to kick it in. And it was Is This the Life? And that's just a banger. Like I know it's not the most like representative of how their sound can be because it's much more friendly, but it just sounds like an awesome, like at times it sounds like an awesome Cure song with the best guitar solo I've heard in my entire life. Like I don't know what's to hate about that. And instantly I was like, then after that, it just sort of clicked. I listened to RES and I was like, not the same thing, but I get this a bit more than I would have before. And I guess the only other thing I listen to besides Black Midi is I re-listened to a bit of I haven't listened to any other album by them, which I know is a sort of a sin, but I listened to Mess by Liars again.
Fuck, you're doing all the me core today, Emily. Holy shit. That's one of my favorite albums.
I know like a lot of people really like their earlier stuff too. I got into this album because like I believe I discovered Fantano's videos like in 2015. So I was like, okay, 2014 just ended. What was his favorite song of that? And it was Mess on a Mission. And I listened to that one. And then the funny thing is, I don't think that's the best song on the album because Vox Tune DD is just
banger.
A banger. Not only is it a banger, someone in the comments described it perfectly. I'm not sure if this video is still up because this was from an album stream from 6 years ago. But someone described it as it starts off harsh and as it goes on, it just gets more lush and lush until the end. It just sounds like a dance party. And I'm just like, that is such a great way of describing how that song feels. I do think the album does sort of run out of some energy at some points, but I still think it slaps in so many moments that I'm glad that it exists. And it's such an interesting one because that's like one of the first albums I got into just because of the internet. Like I didn't know it by reputation. I just found it out through YouTube videos. Weirdly, it was that and like around the same time I listened to Ghosts, Meliora. Yes, Meliora, and those are both great albums to me.
One of my favorite metal albums ever. Oh, love that album.
But it just finds me that I listened to them on like the same day. And I listened to them both through YouTube because I just listened to them because I didn't have Spotify or Amazon Music at the time. So I just was like, these are two albums that were uploaded to YouTube by the artists. I can listen to these.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know whether you did that intentionally, but that was like you just listed one of my favorite albums and one of Jake's favorite albums in succession.
It was not intentionally, but I just get the funny thing is I listened to Mess because I was listening to Black Midi. And I went on to the on Amazon Music. I use Amazon Music because my parents have an Alexa, so I get it for free. Not because I like Amazon or anything. I get it for free, so I'm going to use it. But I was scrolling down, I was looking at similar artists, and there's of course like Black Country New Road, Squid, and then I look on there, it just says Liars, and I'm like, I guess I kind of see it, but I was like, let me reintegrate myself into it. And then I listened to Mess again.
The thing you got to know about Liars is that every single album they make sounds completely unlike every other album they make. Like
that's what I've heard.
They've made albums in like so many different genres. They started out as a punk band, like a proper like noise rock punk band, and then they became like really avant-garde and like tribal music on Drums Not Dead, which I know
Drums Not Dead smacks
as a really great album. And then they went like dance punky and then they went fully electronic in the 2010s and then made records like Mess, which were like completely different. So they're like such an interesting band in the sense that like it's really difficult to describe both the appeal of them and also like what they even are, because they just are so like chameleonic, which is awesome.
I think there's a sort of quality. I guess this is a decent segue. I'm not sure if this is how I'm supposed to segue, but like there is something about that about Black Midi in a way.
Absolutely.
No, I totally see the kinship.
And I think that is as good a point as any to jump into our first album review of the day, which of course is so the ongoing saga of the windmill scene in the UK continues on the Jams and Tea podcast today.
Is that what it's called?
I think so. It's like specifically bands based in, I want to say Brixton or Bristol or something like that. I'm not good with.
Well, I was just calling it weird math rock post punk from Britain. That was all I was calling it.
The thing is, I don't think
bands are even from, because the thing is, Black Midi from London, Black Country New Road are not. They're kind of from all around the place.
It's what I was about to say. Like it gets these bands kind of do get lumped into and they are, I guess, a part of a certain scene, but they are very disparate and they are very diverse, both in terms of like their influences and their memberships and all that sort of thing. Like Black Country New Road is kind of like the platonic ideal, I guess, in my mind anyway. They're my favorite band from this wave. But Black Midi are interesting because like we talk about these bands in terms of like this burgeoning new wave. It feels like there's been like 3 or 4 new waves of post-punk, but we talk about them in terms of this kind of new British wave of post-punk that they sit with in terms of other bands that we have talked about on this podcast: Squid, Black Country New Road, Shame being the other 3 that come to mind. But Black Midi is interesting, I think, because I've been a bit of a like genre purist in the past and said stuff like, is this really post-punk? But is this definitely like elements of clear post-punk influence in all those bands? But Black Midi, I would argue, have made a prog album with Cavalcade. There's really not much post-punk in this record at all. Like and this is what's interesting about Black Midi, is that though you can definitely see the kinship in terms of a lot of the kind of attitude of the music to those other bands, what they're doing, especially now, is so in its own lane, is so like entirely idiosyncratic, that a lot of the comparisons that are made feel kind of almost superficial to me, especially with this record.
Absolutely. I remember when Black Country New Road's new album came out, like that, or I don't know why I said new. It's their only album. But it came out. And I remember one of the first Rate Your Music reviews I saw for it was just some guy who was like, I don't know what the big deal is. It just sounds like Black Midi, and they all sound like crap. And I'm just like, I don't get how anyone says these bands, they have similar styles and they perform together, but they don't sound exactly alike. And I don't get anyone who insists that, because it's not correct to me.
Black Country just name drops Black Midi and they're like, oh, it's the same band.
Yeah. And that's
it's like Black Country New Road is way more like slinty, and Black Midi is like the wild experiment. I would say like there are some moments when you're like, we mentioned them earlier, like remind me at times of like Cardiacs, and like
you said it so I don't have to.
Jazz also big jazz vibes.
There's
on
fusion
this
elements. There's a lot of times I remember I saw a comment that said they don't sound like them, but they had the creative energy of This Heat. And I remember reading that comment and being like, that kind of makes sense.
I think This Heat are a massive point of it. I actually brought them up as a point of interest on Squid. And I think that's a connective tissue between these 2 bands, if anything is that root in not necessarily like the prototypical post-punk sound, but like the avant-garde fringes of that classic sound, where you had bands like This Heat who were taking elements of that, but doing really kind of almost no wave stuff with them. And that spirit, I think, is found in Black Midi as well.
I feel like this should be, because I want to get on to like talking more about what the actual album is in a minute, but I would say like I feel like the thing that connects these bands is like, at least in their earliest records, there is a post-punk connection, and they're kind of avant-garde, and they bring in other instruments, and they're all kind of despondent and noisy,
and a bit of mathiness.
And they're all from Britain, from different places, and they all depict certain ways of existing in a very depressing British landscape, and that's about it, right?
Interesting you should bring that up, because this is an interesting point where I want to talk about another way in which I think that Black Midi are different to a lot of these other bands, is that we have a lot of these bands like Black Country New Road, Shame, and Squid. The subject matter and the tone of that music is very concerned with topics like living in the modern world and the existential dread of post-capitalist society or whatever. And there's also like a very deep sort of pathos imbued in a lot of what those bands sing about. Like Black Country New Road, for instance, especially, is this very emotional band that sing from this very kind of like hard on sleeve perspective, even though it's kind of like soaked in an ironic veil as well. But Black Midi are different, because I feel like Black Midi don't really share any of those concerns or interests. Black Midi are
kind of do.
Okay, well we can definitely
near Detroit, Michigan.
Yeah, sure. Okay, on that first record. But with Cavalcade in specific, this is not the sound of a band that are like particularly at least in my perspective, I definitely could see how people might disagree, and that's fair. But this is on this record, they don't seem as concerned with like the existential dread of living in a post-capitalist society or whatever. They are they definitely have interest in like human folly, I think, is one of the key thematic core parts of this record. But I don't know, this is a band that's less, I guess, I don't know how to describe this distinction, but like it's less
concrete, I would say. I think they explore them in an abstract sort of way. Like you listen to John 50 and it's about a cult leader in a way, but you can see that as a metaphor as well. And I think that's the thing. Like they're less, you listen to Black Country New Road, you have an idea exactly of what they're saying. Even though, well, if you're really into weird art shit, you know what they're saying. If you're just a normal mom listening to the radio, you will have no idea what they're talking about. But like Black Midi, I feel like you have to know the intentions behind the song to kind of get it sometimes.
Yeah, I think maybe what I'm getting at is that I think a barrier to entry with some of those other bands is that you have to find their heart on sleeve, very kind of personal approach to being very emotionally overwrought about these topics. You have to find that interesting. You have to be able to engage with that as a barrier to entry. Whereas with Black Midi, that's not necessarily the case. Like the music very much comes first, and the songs are very much kind of like abstract parables that are interesting in a more, I guess, literary way than the pure emoting of a record like For the First Time. That I guess is what I'm getting at.
I can understand that.
And I have like specific interpretations of what this record is about and some of the subject matter that is touched on in this album that I find quite interesting. What the thing with a band like Black Midi is that the first time, well, this record specifically, is that when I first put it on and the first few times I listened to it, the music itself is so overwhelming. You have to dedicate so much attention to what's going on musically, and that is front and center, that it actually takes them time to process the songs themselves and what is the point of this record even is. But I think that what elevates it from being, you know, a great, really interesting instrumental record to an actually proper great record is that all of these arrangements are in service of really smart and well-written songs that are surprisingly just quite moving and engaging and dense. And when I read the lyricism of Geordie Greep, the frontman of this band, I'm kind of really shocked at how excellent it is. So if the record has a broad theme, it's kind of the relationship between people with power and people that are their subjects. And they explore that in a number of different ways. So one of the ways that they explore it is in a more meta way. So they explore it in terms of the dynamic between artists and their fans, artists and their work, creators and consumers. And that is touched on in certain tracks in this record that I'll get into. And another way they explore it is relationship between people with more tangible power, so leaders and their followers, between those in positions of power and their subjects. And so that, I think, the record kicks off with one of the most overt songs in that regard, John 50, which has this feverish groove that I absolutely love. That the comparison that gets made consistently with this song is Primus, which I
had Residence too. Residence was one that I thought the first time too.
Absolutely. You can definitely hear, I think, both of those things. The weird little comp that I came up with is that it kind of sounds like, especially with the incorporation of horns, it sounds a little bit like To Be Kind era Swans, but on meth.
Yeah.
Like really like.
I can hear that. I can definitely hear that. A bit of oxygen in there.
And that, I think, is that comparison point. I think I hear even more on the horn blears of Chondromalacia patella, which is a fantastically driving and huge piece of music.
Song titles on here are really a mouthful.
Yeah, and I want to shout out as well, just to go back to John 50, is one of the many joys of that song is Geordie Greep's performance. He has this kind of like
when John 50 comes to town.
He has this Irish accent that he kind of adopts on this track. And he has these kind of intonations on certain words like imitation vermilion.
Yeah. Oh, I fucking love that. Imitation vermilion.
It's that same kind of voice he does on Boom 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 that just makes you go like, what the fuck is going on? But like in a cool way.
Well, he's doing this like weird, like it's like Northern Ireland, but not Belfast, like the weird back alleys of some strange country town where a drug man is trying
he's trying to sell you something on the street.
yeah, and it's like this guy is born and bred in London, but the way in which he's doing a deranged Northern Irish man is scarily accurate, and I want to know what he's been through to know what this sounds like.
Yeah. And so the song has this like is the first of multiple tracks on the record that is kind of like parable like in structure. Like it tells the story of the downfall of this titanic figure. John 50, I think, being kind of like a joking allusion to like the popes specifically, because there've been like 23 Pope Johns, so there might as well be like 50 leaders named John. And so there's this story of like this figure kind of being over this figure's subjects being kind of like destroying this kind of leader, basically immortalized beautifully for incidentally in the music video for this track, which is absolutely off the fucking chain.
Directed by the choreographer of Climax, by the way.
That makes so much sense.
Shit.
That makes so much sense, because it is that, I mean, and I mean this in a positive way.
And obviously choreographed by her too.
I mean this in a positive way. That video is some real bodies and spaces shit. Like it is
it really gooped on you, Grinch.
A mythic fucking text.
Absolutely. This idea of like a relationship between people who have some kind of power or people who have some kind of status, and then the people who have and then the people who are their subjects or who have the power to overthrow that power or remove that status, is continued in a song like Marlene Dietrich, the second track on this record, which is like instrumentally the complete polar opposite of the first track on the album. It's funny the way these two songs go into each other. In fact, one of my favorite aspects of this album is the way that it flows. So like every single song just about flows into the next track, or they have like a really abrupt transition that's also like quite satisfying.
Can I tell you something you'll enjoy, Tyler, about Marlene Dietrich, right?
Please do.
It's when that song started, I legitimately checked to see if like a song from like Bursa Parcel Familiars hadn't snuck its way into my queue. Because like the vocal performance is the same and the instruments are stripped back in the same way.
I totally see that.
Yeah, but
that's the thing about Black Midi, is that they have two different vocal styles from their two singers. That it just they both do their own thing, and they both have two different modes for both of them. Where like
and naming it after this famous French person is really cool, because it's using a lot of sort of complicated chords to evoke a very classical French sound as well. So lots of major and minor sevenths. It's a good time, you know.
And it goes even further than that, though. The reason this song is called Marlene Dietrich is, again, it is another kind of parable that relates to this kind of central theme that I've been talking about. This is a song about the actress herself, late in her life, at a point where she's perceived to be beyond her prime and is dismissed by her fans for a late performance that they consider melodramatic. And a point at which, despite the fact that she has been in classic films like The Blue Angel, which is referenced outright in this song, there was a point at which the people turned on her, where she was no longer in vogue. Despite the fact, I mean, it's kind of Sunset Boulevard-y if you think about it, but in many ways it's not like about the tragedy of her, but about the kind of tragedy and arrogance of the people who decided all of a sudden that she no longer deserved to have status. And the song is from the perspective of these kind of like very upper class people who provide this kind of very judging perspective on her, and undeniably influenced by the prejudices of the time. The fact, and there's a nice kind of sentiment in the song, an implicit kind of subtext where it's like people are content to overlook their own misogyny and general racism until, so long as the figure in question has some kind of relevance and some kind of like importance to them, and then once they no longer have a need for them, then those kinds of uglier aspects of their humanity can come to the fore in the way they treat them. And so that's like an interesting sort of continuation of, or a counterpoint or further exploration of the idea of like how power is constructed. Not to get too like over analytical or intellectual, but I do feel like this is what Geordie Griep is going for with a lot of the stories that he tells on this album. But yeah, anyway, the song itself is I love this track. It's rich. I love the layers of acoustic guitars, harpsichord, strings. It's a lush and ornate tribute to that legendary actress and her story, and it as well as being just like another feather in the bow of Black Midi as well. Like they're able to pull this track off with aplomb, and I dig the shit out of it, honestly. It's super cool, and Geordie's vocal tone is like obviously so different from the vocal tone that he's using on the opening track of the record. So immediately you're getting, within these first two tracks, you're getting a taste of what makes this band so dynamic and exciting. And I guess your mileage will vary in terms of how much of it clicks and works for you, but for me, I am just fully enthralled by it.
I would say interesting. So I mentioned this earlier. For me, with Black Midi, is I discovered them like by just like chance and being like, I wonder what this is. And I listened to Schlangenheim, and it blew me away in a way. Like I didn't think it was perfect. It wasn't like my favorite album of the year, but I listened to it and it was so full of creative energy. It was one of my favorites. Like I remember at the end of the year, I still put Magdalene as my best of that year. Magdalene, All My Heroes Are Cornballs. But like I still was like, Schlangenheim is not perfect, but it has so much potential and so much creative energy that it's like a top 5 album of an already great year in music. And I just was sort of like, not only was I in that moment, like I kept listening to it, I kept enjoying it. There's so many great moments on there. Doctor is great, Near Detroit, Michigan. I'm not actually as big into Boom 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 as other people are, but I can listen to it. It's still fun, and that performance at the Mercury Prize is just wonderful in so many ways. But I just like, for ever since then, I was sort of like, this is the most exciting band in rock to me. There's no other band that makes me more excited for their future than this band. Like there could be a band that makes a better album, but there's not one that makes me more excited. So I had been waiting for a year and a half before this album came out. I wasn't even expecting them to come out with it for a bit, because I just like, quarantine fucks things up, whatever. I'm not going to judge them if it takes them a couple of years to come out with a follow-up. But I was just hoping that it would come out and that they would fulfill on that potential, because you always see that with some bands where they have this great first album and you're like, this band could be making masterpieces, and then they don't follow up. They either make just one album or they just completely fall off the map. And so when this came out, I was surprised by it. And I remember, well, I knew it was coming out, but like I remember John 50 comes out and I hear about 2 days later and I'm just like, okay, why did no one tell me about this? I'm so excited. And I listened to it and I'm just like, wow, this is so much different from the last one. But like, of course, after a couple listens, like I kind of got it better, but like, it's that thing of like, I compared it to The Residents earlier, like that thing of like sometimes listening to a wild track from a band like The Residents or Cardiacs, where you're just kind of like, okay, I'm going to need to listen to this one a few times because that was just a lot to take in. But then I listened to Slow. I was trying to reserve some of the songs for listening to it, but I was too tempted by Slow. We mentioned music videos earlier. That is one of the best music videos I've seen in my entire life. Like, it's amazing. And that song is the best song of the year, in my opinion. Like, it's the best song on the album to me, and it's the best song of the year. It just, that build up from I Guess I'll Wait, that section, the way it just keeps building and each section gets more and more intense, especially with the music video where you just see that razor go through and the world explode on the last one. It just accentuates how powerful that moment is. And I remember I was thinking like, okay, I gotta wait for this album. I was circling that date on my calendar. And then 2 days later, they just drop it early. They just have a live stream and drop it early. And I'm just like, what? It's out. I listened to it and I'm loving it. I'm loving every track. And then I get to Hogwash and Balderdash and I get very confused.
That's the most Cardiacs-esque song on the record.
Uh-huh.
It is, but it is the one that totally, like, in your first time listening to it, it fucks up the rhythm in your head where you're just like, what just happened there? Because they all kind of lead into each other a bit at that point. You go from Diamond stuff and goes right into Throne. Throne being my second favorite on the album. It's just beautiful in every single way. And the first time, Hogwash really did mess me up a bit. And it's still probably my least favorite on the album in terms of songs that I would return to, because it just is one that sort of just happens and it's very explosive and it's like a release of chaotic energy. And I think that works once you listen to it a couple of times. But like, it's the one that I'm going to return to the least because it is sort of just an explosion. Like, it's not exactly as much of a emotional moment as something like Dethroned or Slow. But after like getting used to it, like, so much of this album just goes together and it really does feel like it feels like something that it feels like a singular vision in a way. Like, it's not like it's inventing a new genre per se, but in the sense that, like, I don't think any other band's going to sound like this. I don't think you could copy this. It's an album that feels uniquely its own vision. And the funny thing is we're comparing to all these like bands that like are known for being wild. But the interesting thing is by the end of it on my last listen, right before I came on here, I realized it kind of is like in the core of the Crimson King in a way. Not saying that King Crimson is like not a wild band in a way, but like, I mean, it's become normalized because it's been so long, but like, this is an album that in a way feels like a trek, like in the core of the Crimson King. Like, it just,
I think
it really, yeah.
I think King Crimson's a great reference point for this album specifically and how it sounds, like especially that like sort of 70s King Crimson, although it even kind of fuses the sound of the 70s era with like their later eras as well.
I was gonna say Three of a Perfect Pair at least comes to my mind.
But what I think,
like, I listened to Ascending Forth, and Ascending Forth just sounds like it sounds like In the Core of the Crimson King, the song, like, in a way, like, it just sounds like a finale that just goes off. And in a way, Hogwash and Balderdash kind of sounds like, it's not, is it Epitaph that has the song that just, it happens and then
thinking of Moonchild.
Yeah, Moonchild.
Moonchild, where it's just like 6 minutes of just like random noises. That's kind of, in a way, Hogwash Balderdash has more musical elements to it, but in a way it feels like that moment where it's just like, all right, we're just going to throw everything into this part to like this explosive energy of creative energy that has less of a point.
You mentioned the Close to Ascending Force, right?
Yeah,
that's the track for me. Well, I think for the whole album, In the Core of the Crimson King I agree, wonderful reference, right? But with that closer, that's just full of references that if I were to list them off, I'd sound like I just pull them out of my ass. Like, it's got a bit of like Colin Stetson. It sounds a bit like a free jazz rendition of a Frank Sinatra song. Like, it's got that like lounge bar kind of I did it my way thing.
Morgan said last night that it was like Steven Wilson on shrooms, which I think is my favorite comparison so far.
Yeah, it starts like the track it most closely reminds me of, at least in the beginning, is Transients off of Pain Cannot Erase. And then it turns into not that.
Yeah, like by the end it feels like Steven Wilson on the thing you mentioned. But like if he was collabing with Nina Simone with like the end to Midsummer playing in the background, what it feels like, it's like the end to like all that jazz. It's like a bow out, you know.
Definitely.
I think something I want to bring up at this point that I think kind of maybe explains these threads that the two of that Saoirse and Emily you've both kind of talked about the kind of uniqueness of this band and reference points, is that this band obviously this band are obviously so ridiculously idiosyncratic. Like Emily, you're absolutely right. There's no other band that sounds like this. And that is one of the big appeals of them, right? Is they're so unique and enthralling and just ridiculously committed to doing their own thing. And when you do have bands who like, that is a way that I think a lot of bands try to get attention, right? By just deliberately doing something different and attention grabbing. And I think what makes Black Midi separates them from the herd is that, well, for one, they're able to integrate their influences in a way where you can definitely hear them and you can kind of try to list them off, but they're so deftly integrated and they're so numerous that ultimately just ends up being like a way of trying to describe the music, when really the only way of describing the music is that it sounds like Black Midi. It is just them. Like, it is just, they have subsumed all of this history of rock and jazz and stuff into their own style. And the reason why they sound interesting and like are different from any old band that just tries to do something that no one else has done before is that they're able to infuse those influences in an interesting way because they are fundamentally talented musicians. Like, they just they have something. Like, every single member of this band is just gifted. And
God, the drumming on this album, man.
Yeah.
Wow.
Some real jazz drumming shit.
Everyone
but
talks about Morgan Simpson, the drummer, and for good reason. He is absolutely astonishing. If you've seen any of their live performances, you can see that he is growing limbs while he plays. He reminds me
most closely of John Theodore of the Mars Volta.
Oh, wow, great pick.
I was gonna say, when Tyler brought up that this is more of a prog record, that if this is prog, it's like Bedlam and Goliath prog, because it's a lot.
Sound-wise, it's even got a little Francis the Mute in it, honestly, jazz-wise.
Yeah.
The interesting thing to me is when I always think of that drummer, I think of that first, the thing that broke him, the KEXP performance that they first one did. And I remember the whole time that he's wearing this, A Tribe Called Quest t-shirt. And it's like, how many like rock bands are like referencing both like bands like I almost said the Cardiac, bands like Cardiacs and stuff like A Tribe Called Quest, and making them all work into their own sonic palette, where it sounds like this unique thing where they just take from whatever they want. And it's something that stands out to me.
What that represents, I think, is the fact that this is a band that could fundamentally only exist at this juncture in history, when all of music
have access to everything.
Yeah, exactly. When you have access to all of music, and when music culture is represented by and is emblematic of people like us who just consume music, like of all types. We go from prog to jazz to whatever. We go all over the map because we can, and because we love music, and because we're interested in consuming music and talking about it.
Consume prolific.
Exactly, consume prolific. This is a band who are beautifully emblematic of that era of music fandom and are fundamentally gifted and talented, and so they're able to integrate that spirit into the music itself, and that's represented beautifully by what you just said.
I mean, it's interesting because you brought up earlier how much potential Emily, you brought up how much potential you saw in Schlagenheim, and albums full of potential, right? But it's not just that they've like delivered on potential, it's that they've seen the band promised by that album, and they're like, right, we're going to go like 5 steps ahead and go a left turn about 3 albums before that. And
that's the thing, it doesn't sound like you'd expect the sequel to Schlangenheim sound, but that's what you want. It's like, would you want another? If you see a potential in a band, you don't want them to just create the same album a second time in a way, and it feels like that big step.
Absolutely, yeah.
But it's also in that way that like you listen to it the first time and you go, "Oh, this is not what I was expecting." But in the same way, like I went back to Schlangenheim after listening to this, and it had that effect on me that I think a great album can have, where you just listen to any album before it and you just go, I can only think about it in the context of what would come later. Like I listen to Schlangenheim and I just think about what led the Cavalcade, and it doesn't make it like a worse album anyway, but it just shows like that like there's a step forward that came afterwards, and I can only view it in the context of what came later, even though I listened to one first.
Yeah, and so what I think is a nice way of encapsulating the shift from that first record to this one is that, I mean, that first record, obviously it's your band's first album, especially when you're a band as, you know, relentlessly creative and interested in doing so many different things as Black Midi are. You kind of throw so many different ideas out onto that record, and that's, you know, the joy of that record is like, what the fuck are they going to do next? And Cavalcade is obviously, by comparison, much more focused, and I think that's encapsulated by the title of the record, a cavalcade. Like it is an absolute barrage of non-stop energy that is very specifically honed in a very specific way, and you feel like it is one shade of hundreds of different things they could have possibly done with this sophomore record, and yet they've chosen to focus it in this specific way, and they've honed that to an absolute T. And that is what's so satisfying about the record, is that you really get to feel that everything is and to make a stupid Radiohead reference, in its right place. Like there's not a single part of this record that I feel is extraneous, and it's a very easy album to put on and listen to from front to back. Definitely exhausting, but if you have the kind of appetite for the music itself, it's very easy to listen to from front to back, and that's, I think, one of the things that makes it a really great album.
Yeah, I think you've just hit the nail on the head. It feels like an album that like it feels like they're not only like expanding their sound, but they're focusing it at the same time. They're letting in more elements, but they have a direction for them more. And it's not that Schlangenheim felt directionless to me. I think it had a way, but it felt like a bunch of tracks put together in a good sequencing manner, but I didn't tell like it was like making a story with it or anything. It just sounded like a really great record. This sounds like an experience in a way. Like I mentioned there are some tracks on here that I could listen to out of context and still enjoy, but I'm just going to listen to the whole thing on its own. It just sounds so great on its own that it's great to experience it that way.
Absolutely. Well, one person we haven't heard from at all yet, who I'm sure will have really interesting things to say about this record, is August.
Sorry for talking too much.
No, that's not a bad thing.
Great.
This has been really good so
far. We all literally do that every week.
August, I'm curious to hear how you found the experience of living with this record.
Well, one thing I wanted to highlight about this record that I think is especially apparent in the mid section, which I don't think anyone has really touched on, not that anyone else but me here would be the, I think, pronounced influence of Frank Zappa on this album. There is a ton.
Now it makes sense.
His hallmarks scattered across this record, the instruments synchronizing to build up to one rising crescendo. His compositional elements are littered all throughout the midpoint of this record, and I find that incredibly fascinating to see modern day recontextualizations of his work, not or at least of his style. Not that I would say I think that Black Midi feel like I would never listen to these tracks and mistake them for being Zappa songs, because they obviously inject so much of their own personality into it. Like I think of a track like Chromatica, however the hell you say
Lady
it.
Gaga's Chromatica.
Yeah, that one. I think of that song.
Can't wait for Black Midi Oreos.
That and Slow. Some very interesting Zappa parts on it, but also the vocal arrangements are so distinctly Black Midi. There's so many distinctly modern production elements they're bringing into this record. But that's also to suggest that I think the kind of front and back, the bookshelves of this record are a very distinct and interesting parts in their own right. I love the just bombacity of a song like John 50 and Hogwash and Balderdash. I love the kinetic, frenetic energy brought to these songs, which just sparks them to life. And I found initially I wanted more songs like them, but as I engaged more with the compositional elements, I was fine with it. But I did find myself thinking quite often that the lyrics did too often take a backseat to the instrumentation, which is not necessarily a bad thing personally, because I like my good instrumental. I'm known to be partial to those, but not all of the lyrics struck me as particularly interesting or the main focus of the song, which granted, they aren't really at points. Mixing makes that plenty obvious. But I did have to note it as an element I would wish for some improvement on. But the melodic centers of these songs, just brilliant. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the best prog records we've had in recent memory.
I'm so pleased that you feel that way. It's very validating because I consider you an authority on this kind of thing.
Oh.
You are the podcast harshest critic after all, so it means something.
But yeah, I want to bounce off. I'll bounce a little bit off of what you're saying. I have lots to say about this record, so I'm deliberately trying not to say it all at once. But I want to bounce off a couple of things that you've said. One thing is obviously to do with the lyricism. I already touched on the fact that I think that there is a lot that is thematically interesting going on in the lyricism of this record. As you've said, there are definitely parts of this record where the vocals are not mixed particularly high in the mix of the songs, so you do have to like have a lyric sheet. But I've been vocal about this in the past, that I don't think that not being able to understand or hear the lyrics in a record doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad decision. It just means that, you know, it's part of accentuating what sounds best in the song. And I think that the lyricism across this record is uniformly excellent. There are certainly some moments towards the center of the record where the lyricism moves away from that parable style that I talked about with the first two tracks, and that continues crucially in the last two tracks of this record as well, and more into a kind of esoteric realm. Chondro Malaysia Patella is this song that seems to be like quite a grandiose song about human folly, the insistent kind of arrogance of people that ends up being their own source of self-destruction. It's there's less a specific example here, the way there is in John 50 and Marlene Dietrich, of this kind of idea of the downfall of a person. But I like the fact that it's kind of extended through the theme of that track. Slow is perhaps maybe the most lyrically insubstantive song on the record, but I really don't care because it is one of the most intense and immense grooves of the record. It's absolutely amazing. And I will say, when I first heard this as a single, I didn't like it. I was really thrown off by it. I didn't quite understand it. For starters, the vocals are delivered on this track by Cameron Picton, who is the other vocalist and bassist of this band. And it just threw me off hearing it in isolation. But listening to it with the context of the record this week, it really pops as a kind of centerpiece track. The lyrical theme, there's still a lyrical theme here. It's kind of about, I guess, the decay of existence. It's very kind of metal theme, actually, kind of a death metal theme. Now that I think about it, like decay and rot and death being this kind of like inevitable but awfully distant thing. So it's compelling in that regard. I also want to shout out the fact that despite the fact that so much of the vocals across this record are so kind of like weird and quirky and dissonant and strange, that you also have this moment on this track where Cameron has this incredible harmony with himself overdubbed that's just like, it's like so beautiful. And this record it's one of the ways in which I love the playfulness of this record, is that it'll be throwing this real dissonance at you. Like Condro Malaysia, for instance, is an incredibly dissonant song. Like it has those classic dissonant swan's horns that remind me of like Little God in My Hands, for instance. But like then they'll also just juxtapose that with moments of like surprising prettiness. And that's one of the things that I love so much about the arrangements of all of these songs, even the really heavy stuff, is that you get all that intensity, you get a lot of that heaviness, but it'll also just give way for these moments of beauty as well that are totally unexpected. And I think in terms of the arc of the record as a whole, that's emblematized. That's not a word. That's represented.
The fuck did you just say?
It's not a word. I know it's not a word. That's represented by a track that I don't think I've heard anyone mention yet, which is Diamond Stuff, which I absolutely love. It is a necessary breathing point at this record, especially at the point that it comes. I love the eerie plucked melody. It reminds me of I tried to think for ages what that kind of plucked melody reminded me of, and I couldn't quite put the nail on the head. But one thing that did come to mind was kind of like Jocelyn Pook's score for Eyes Wide Shut, which uses piano keys in a sort of similarly eerie, distant way, but it just sounds like nothing else. And I love also the way that this song blossoms into this gorgeous resolution towards the end. It's totally unexpected as well, like so many developments on this record, but it's also just very pleasing to hear. And it's one of those many examples of this band completely surprising you in a way that doesn't feel like it's just for the sake of surprising you, but it's a moment of pure inspiration.
Yeah, I thought Diamond Stuff was like it's not going to be a song that's going to like blow you away in the same way of something like Slow, where it's just like it doesn't sound as grandiose, obviously, but you need a break sometimes. And that's like one of the great songs where there's just a low-key moment, just sort of, and it still sounds beautiful. It's just I think it's perfect for the moment it comes up. I just would say the only reason why I personally wouldn't bring it up as much is simply because it is that reprieve in a way. And as a result, it doesn't need to shine. And I think that's the best part about it, is that it doesn't need to hit you over the head with itself. It just sort of builds and builds, and then it's a perfect intro to the next track.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that note as well, I know I'm not the only person here passionate about the song Dethroned, so I'll definitely let some people talk about that track. But I just want to say, I listened to this album last night. No, it was the night before last, and I was just driving around because I like to, when I can, throw especially if it's a record I like, throw around we're going to review on in the car and just blitz around listening to it. And I could tell that this was going to be a good record to do that. And then when it got to Dethroned, I was like, I had turned my stereo up to like dangerous levels during this song, because it's just so fucking addictive and awesome. It opens with these horns that reminded me of all things Spirit of Eden era Talk at the beginning of this track. And then the song completely changes tack very quickly. It balloons into this guitar-driven rager. It has what I love about this song, another surprise of this band, is that the guitars on this track have a garagey feel. They reminded, specific reference point that I don't know if anyone else will know, but it reminded me specifically of Deer Hunter's album Monomania, which has a similar guitar sound as this record. But anyway, it's like a ragged and huge tone. It's like there's a lot of reverb on this track, especially on the vocals, and everything is just kind of like ringing out in a really kind of sharp and jagged, but also like bleary and huge and dynamic way. And it gets to the point where the song itself is just feels like surreal and huge and disorienting. It's almost like the sounds are surrounding you and moving, and they don't have to use like studio effects like panning or anything to create this illusion. It's just something that they're able to do through pure instrumentation, and it's absolute fucking it's a corker.
It's just one of those songs that like it just feels like like some of these songs on this album, it feels like a trek through something. It feels like you're taking a journey somewhere, and there's just so many moments. I think there's a thing, like these feel like experimental tracks, but you never doubt the emotional resonance in them. They just hit you in the same way.
I feel like what you're saying is true, because the experimentation is always in service of the music providing an emotional context, whether that's an insane, surging, frantic sort of, God, I need to break out of this mental asylumness, or this more laid back melancholy, you know. And the experimentation is always, how can we find a new way to say that, you know?
And what's also great about Dethroned and the way it sounds as well is, again, to get my songwriter cap on again, is that the way this song develops is beautifully representative of what the song is about, which is about refusing to accept the reality of your downfall. So again, it continues this idea of like power and an individual's relationship to it. And this is the point on the record where the person, the character, the figure, is, as the title suggests, dethroned. Like their glory is snatched away, and they lash out against their newfound circumstance. And the ways the guitars sound in this track, the way they get really distorted and ripping and loud and huge, represents that kind of like desperate fury. And it's just a great unification of theme and sound, as well as just, even if you're not interested in any of that stuff, it also just fucking rips. Dope as shit.
I don't have anything new or particularly revelatory to say about this. I think it's very fucking good.
Take.
Yeah, consistently exciting and engaging, and sort of, you know, I didn't have the, I'll say it like this, I didn't have the ability to be thrown off by Hogwash and Balderdash, because by the time I got to that point in the album, I was just like, all right, fucking anything goes, fuck it, whatever, just let it happen. And I think sort of what I find a little bit grating about this scene to some degree, even though again there's nothing to come out of it that I've heard that I particularly dislike. But what I particularly what kind of grates at me is that sometimes it feels like bands just trying too hard to be weird or to stand out. And I feel like Black Midi, especially on Cavalcade, makes it all of that look so effortless and genuine in a way that sort of, it's the first one of these albums to come from this scene to fully click with me in that way, where it feels like its eccentricities are not a fashion statement. However, I feel about said fashion statement aside, I almost said fascist statement. That's a different thing. That's a how I feel about said fashion statements aside, that's just it comes across that way sometimes, and it really doesn't here. And I think that's probably the most impressive thing of all. And I think this sort of prog and fusion aspects of this album also really, like, it feels like it's of a certain time, that being the mid 70s to early 70s, but also so distinctly modern in such a way that it could have only come out of this particular scene, which is very particular in the way that they are about playing to the Zoomer ennui, the millennial ennui in general. So yeah, it's really, it feels like a statement, and something that will be sort of seen as a landmark as time goes on.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I like that you said about like feeling like it's not necessarily like kowtowing to the popular in fashion in vogue ennui sort of thing that a lot of these bands write about, even though I say this even though I gave For the First Time a 10, and it's currently still my second favorite
like
album of the
there's
year.
there's a reason it's in vogue, which is if you do it well, it resonates really strongly.
Yes, but and there's
And,
also
you
a
know,
reason
like-
that it can be irritating, which is that people can latch onto it and make that, you know, their whole personality, and a scene can do that, and it can be you know, overwhelming, and it can make you sort of tired of that, which is why Cavalcade is so refreshing.
Just look at the last Idols record, like, you know, that's a great example.
Which is why Cavalcade's so refreshing, because it's not concerned with any of that. It is a record that is about very specific things that are very distinct to the kinds of things that these other bands are writing about, at least in my perspective anyway. And it is also being done with a very particular instrumental panache that no other band can approximate, nor should they try, nor should they have to be great in their own right. It's just that Black Midi are firmly in their own lane, and that is what's so joyful about them existing.
I will say, like, I agree, like, the scene, the interesting thing for me is, like, I do enjoy a lot of stuff from the scene. I enjoyed the new Black Country Day Road, I enjoyed the new Squid, but, like, for me, Black Midi has always, as you said, like, been in their own lane, in a sense of, like, they all do their own thing in a way. Like, all these bands kind of do their own thing. You could say that Black Midi is the most unique out of them, but I would still say that none of them sound exactly alike. But the thing for me is, like, the thing that makes Black Midi so special in the scene to me is not that they're, like, exceedingly, it's not that, like, the scene is weak or anything. Is that they are just doing something that it's hard to imagine anyone else doing in any way. I feel like and this isn't anything against these bands, but I feel like I've heard parts of Black Country Road and Squid before, and they were really good, and they do really good versions of them. I feel like because Black Midi takes from so much and it becomes its own unique thing, that it highlights the scene in a special way that I'm not sure any other band can, in the sense that it shows its limitless potential.
It's almost as though, like, it's transcending the scene, right? Because it's doing things that it's connected to the scene by virtue of the band and their cultural identity, but it's also doing things that no one else in the scene is doing. So therefore it's kind of extending the boundaries and the limitations of the scene and the idea, and it's kind of going beyond any of the things that it kind of gets pigeonholed into being by people who don't necessarily pay close attention to what's actually happening musically. So that's, I guess, it's really exciting to have a band like this. And just to continue along my little intellectualization of the album, because I'm nearly kind of at the end of it now, I want to take a moment, first of all, to shout out a track that has been a little bit divisive, I guess, but that I really love, which is Hogwash and Boulder Dash. And I have a specific reasons for why I love this track. It is this, and again, I've talked about the influence of the Cardiacs on it. It is this Cardiacs-esque piece of raging noise that, despite its condensed runtime, I also want to point out this track has a surprising amount of dynamic variation. It is, of course, balls to the wall. It is the most loud and chaotic piece on the record, but it also has this really lush and even pretty bridge in the center of it. It goes through a lot of different movements through its very short runtime. And I also think that the brevity of this track is kind of part of the point of it. It's the storytelling track again. It goes back to that storytelling thing that the record started off with, where it's these two outlaws that are running from the law but are cornered at every turn. It's this kind of Sisyphean tragic tale where this classic film trope of a couple on the run is inverted by that couple being caught early, and unceremoniously their passionate escape is burnt out bluntly. And that's reflected in the shortness of the track and the fact that it kind of ends in the middle of a sentence, as though these two characters are just killed very suddenly, and the song just cuts out into the next track. And that's a really awesome and effective, again, marriage of what the lyrics are about and what the music is doing. But then the last track on the record, which we have sort of touched on a little bit, but I feel like we haven't talked about quite enough, and I know Morgan loves this track as well, so I'm hoping he'll be able to add to some of the things I'm saying. But this is the point. Like, this is already a great record, I think, anyway. Like, there's already so much good stuff on it, but Ascending Forth as a closer is what really elevates it for me from great album to spectacular record, especially considering the fact that it's so tight in like 40 odd minutes. It is a grand closing statement. I think I've talked so much about the songwriting on this record, but I want to emphasize, I think that this is the best songwriting that Geordie Greep has ever displayed on a song so far. It's not too esoteric and difficult. In fact, it's not really that esoteric and difficult at all. It's very easy to kind of pick up on what the song's about. But at the same time, the way he writes is so lyrical and poetic and like really literate that it's just a joy to listen to him speak. It's this, and it manages to be enjoyable on all those levels, as well as the ways in which it's already been touched on by other people. It's so instrumentally interesting and linked to things like, you know, like Frank Sinatra or whatever. Like it has that kind of intonation in it that is absolutely unmistakably a reference point. So it's enjoyable musically. It's enjoyable for the fact that it tells a very sort of straightforward story about this kind of like writer's block suffering artist. But it's also really great because all of these things come together to encapsulate the ideas of the album. And these basically are existential dread and a kind of Kafkaesque disillusionment with the world that you get in songs like Slow and Diamond Stuff. The fruitless pursuit of greatness as a self-indulgent task, which is links back to Dethroned and Chondro Malaysia, and the main theme of the record, which is the artists or the person with powers tenuous relationship with relevance and their audience or the people who give them power, which is of course a thing that we've already talked about with earlier tracks. And so this is essentially a story on this song about an artist who is looking for purity, which is basically that one brilliant idea that they believe they were born to express as an artist, but that seems to escape them. That feeling that your best work as an artist has been forever out of your reach, and the sense of self-doubt that brings on. And ultimately, at the end of the song, the artist is cast out by those who have commissioned his work because he's been unable to produce the masterpiece they've been waiting for. Again, metaphorical link to other tracks on this record with that story. And he becomes obsessed with the idea that everyone loves ascending fourths, which on the most basic level refers to the musical interval that is the backbone of Western music, like the perfect fourth. One of the most common and satisfying chord patterns that is like all popular music is basically based around this very straightforward musical concept. And so this person, this artist fixates on this idea, repeats this everybody loves ascending force over and over again, as though they're trying to like trick themselves into believing that this will be the key to their success, is relying on this thing. But also that's at conflict with their impulse as an artist, which is to challenge their audience, to create some boundary pushing art. Surely that would go against the logic of the ascending fourth as your tool. Do you want to make music that is going to appeal by relying on some kind of common denominator, or do you want to do something that is original and different that everyone might hate? And there's that core artistic impulse, that core idea of is kind of a meta aspect of like reflecting where the band are at, right? They have this huge level of popularity that they gained from Schlagenheim, a record that blew up, was critically successful for an alternative band anyway, was reasonably commercially successful. They had a massive reputation for their live act and a huge army of like loyal fans. And it's that sophomore slump thing, like what do you do next? And so Ascending Forth is both a beautiful kind of metaphorical song about the artistic journey to try and the fruitless task of trying to please everyone, and also this kind of triumphant statement of Black Midi ascending forth, like moving up, continuing to expand who they are. And that there's like such a density and a depth there that I think is so impressive, especially considering these guys are like so young. I've watched interviews with Geordie Greep and the other members of this band, and it's easy to forget listening to their music that these guys are fucking kids. Like they've consumed all of these reference points. There was a great Stereogum interview with them where they talked about like 20, 30 different things that have influenced them, from Miles Davis's In a Silent Way to the 2000s cartoon Recess and the Adventures of Tintin and Vladimir Nabokov, all of these different things that they've like consumed growing up and have kind of like informed their creativity in a way. And so like I'm rambling at this point, but the fact that they're able to make something this, I guess, artistically coherent and cohesive and meaningful and meta, while also just being purely enjoyable on a complete experiential level, is like so exciting and is everything that I could possibly have hoped for from this album.
I want to say you mentioned Recess influenced Black Midi. I like to now believe that John 50 is about King Bob.
You know, I think you might be onto something. Absolutely. Okay, well, favorite tracks and ratings then. Emily, you can kick us off if you want this time. What are your 3 favorite tracks on the album, and what would you give it as a rating out of 10?
Yeah. All right. So my 3 favorite tracks, I already mentioned Slow is probably my favorite song of the year so far. For a while, that honor went to Laura Less's Haunted. I thought that was like one of the best songs of the year. But Slow but is definitely my favorite of the year so far. I'm a big fan of Dethroned. Dethroned just sounds really interesting and unique, and it again, it feels like a journey of a track, and it just, as you said, it has so much going on in it, and it just, it's the song on there that compares to Slow's grandiosity in terms of scope and emotional journey for me. And God, I hate that this is the one I have to say the name of. My third place is definitely Kronda Militia Patella. I believe that's Kronda Militia Patella. I was close.
Track 3.
Yeah, track 3. But yeah, that one is just, it's all over the place, but it never, it's both all over the place and yet never out of rhythm in a way. Like, not talking about like specific like rhythm as in like the beat itself, but you always feel like the beat within you while you're listening to it. It always feels like you're just vibing to it constantly, and that's a special track quality that I think is present there. That's got to be my third place. And I struggled for a bit thinking about what I would rate this, because I was like, I mean, again, Hogwash and Balderdash, it took me a bit to get into, and that was sort of the thing that was, I was like, does this disrupt the flow of the album? That was my question in my head. And maybe slightly, but not that much. Like, it does fit when you listen to it in the context of it, and it really does once you get used to it. And there's just so much stuff on here, and comparing it to Schlangenheim after going back, like I said, like it really does put everything into perspective in a way. It feels like something was something that was led up to in a way. And while I would say that there's a possibility that Black Midi could even top this, when I say that, I mean that Black Midi has a chance of being like the most important artist of this decade in a way, because already this is gonna go down as a really important album this decade, in my opinion, already. And if they can top this, and I believe they have it in them too, maybe, then, because I think any album can be technically topped in a way, because if it's not the greatest thing ever made, just logically that makes sense. But like, there's so little I could take away from it at all, in terms of like, there's nothing I could do that I think could make this album better than it is already as it exists. And I'm going to regret it if I don't say it anyway. It's a 10. It's perfect. I don't give a lot of 10s, but this is an album that just feels like it exists within its own lane and exists in its own way, that it feels like a revelation for a band, and that you rarely get that, and that's special.
Well, I'm glad you can make your debut on Jams and Tea with such a great record to you then.
Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I did get basically asked like, is there any albums this year gonna get into? And I'm like, I mean, this is the one I've been waiting for all year. So yeah.
Well, fair enough. Beautifully said. Jake, do you want to go next? And we'll go in regular order from now on.
Sure. My 3 favorite tracks are, let's see, Dethroned, Ascending Fourth, and probably Sean L. Least favorite track is regrettably Slow, and I give it a 7.5.
I'll take it.
For me, I would say favorites are John 50, Slow, and
John 50.
Yes,
It's a regal
Okay,
title.
what is the fucking deal with that? Because literally everywhere I've seen this listed, it just says John L. So I have no idea what
Roman
you're fucking
numeral.
talking about.
Roman numeral. Roman numeral.
Oh, okay.
It says John 50 in the lyrics.
I didn't. Well, that's why it confused the shit out of me. I haven't learned what the Roman numeral for 50 is in 10 goddamn years.
I'm a football fan. I have to. That's how they name the Super Bowls.
Yeah.
I had an easier time learning basic Japanese than I did learning Roman numerals for whatever Super Bowl we're on.
and final favorite track is Dethroned. Least favorite would be Diamond Stuff, and I would give it an 8 out of 10.
Was I supposed to bring props?
No, that's just
that's
just
quintessentially August thing.
That's just August.
Show her what's on the when it's completely smoothed out.
Oh
You gotta
yes,
see
important.
Yeah, boy.
Hey there, kids! It's your boy Steve
On the
Buscemi.
drunken
Tony
face
B.
of Steve Buscemi.
Just what? How do you? I mean, it's literally a how do you do their fellow kids in a way.
Yeah. How do you do that, fellow kids? You heard the new Black Midi?
I do love the fact that I knew that meme before anyone else did because I was a 30 Rock fan as a kid.
Delightful. Morgan.
Yeah. My 3 favorites are Ascending Fourth, Dethroned, and Slow. I guess if I had to pick a least favorite, I would pick Chondro Malaysia Patella, just because I feel like it feels a little bit redundant compared to Slow. I feel like they sort of explore similar soundscapes and ideas rhythmically, and I vastly prefer Slow. So whatever, and I would give it a 9.
9.
Also, to end my thoughts on this album, Geordie Greep sounds like a name of a Star Wars character.
My fucking Ian Cohen from IndieCast, my boy, he did a thing on Twitter where he like took a screen grab of an interview and it had Geordie Greep printed as a name and said, this motherfucker had one career option in life, and that is to be the front man of a British post-punk band.
Black Midi. Yeah.
Like, what else can you do?
Either that or be a Star War.
My favorite tracks, I'm including John L, whatever the third track is pronounced, and Ascending Fourths. If I don't really have a least favorite track. Maybe no, I don't really have one, but it's getting an 8 from me.
Right, my 3 favorite tracks on the album are John 50, Dethroned, and Ascending Fourth. I don't have a least favorite, and the album gets a big fat 1010.
I'm not
Crazy.
alone.
Absolutely.
I'm not the weak one.
And
I'm not the only one who gave it the highest score.
Well, I mean,
I swear I can be harsh on albums, but I just wanted this one so bad.
you gave it a 10, and Tyler gave it a 1,010.
yeah, I gave it a 1010.
Yeah. So
Beat that.
kind of outdid all of us there.
But that's a very high.
I give it an 11.
This
come
rating
true in
goes
heaven.
up to 11.
I was gonna say
There it
Spinal.
There it is. The Spinal Tap reference. There it is for the fucking 50th time.
So the average rating is 8.8 out of 10, which is the same as I'm just gonna rattle off a few. Song for a Daughter by Laura Marling, Age of Ads by Sufjan Stevens, Square Pusher's Ultra Visitor, Drinking Songs by Matt Elliott, and Yoshimi Battles the Pink Monsters by the Flaming Lips.
Robots. You did that on purpose.
I will say I do agree with Age of Odds being rated highly. I think that one is underrated by a lot of Sufjan stans.
By this podcast.
No, because we're cool.
Yeah.
We're cooler than the stands.
I will say I have to get this out before I leave. I did find out that apparently Jordy Creep has a Twitter account.
Well,
And his icon is the breakdancing Mario from Mario Dance Dance Revolution. And I find that very funny. Literally all his tweets are just shit posts, and it's fucking amazing. Like literally right
his
before he
title
tweets out-
is The Greep.
Yeah. Not just that, but like the last tweet he tweets out before the album is out is what's better, cognac or water? And it's a poll.
A grown
There's an
chimp
image
has
here
the
that just
strength
says
of
salt
8
and
men.
Yes, I retweeted that one. I'm trying to look through here. He retweeted this guy that just said, "Thank you, Homer Simpson, for coming to watch my game," and he just quote tweeted it with epic.
He retweeted.
Really like, welcome to hell, you have metal shoelaces.
He retweeted
just an
one
image
from-
of John Cryer from 2.5 Men.
Jesus.
He retweeted from Isaac Wood, the lead singer of Black Country New Road. The caption is "Such a pleasure to meet at the Needle Drop today. Actually, a
I
really
saw
cool
that.
guy
That's
in
so
real life."
good.
But
I
the
didn't
picture
realize that
is
was
just
from Isaac Wood.
but the guy in the background is just a dude in like an old man in a yellow flannel.
Fuck, I'm following Isaac Wood too. These
Yeah.
guys have better shitpost game than me. And I'm impressed by that because I have like 10 times their followers and I'm not even in a band. I just suck. Like I don't know why they have less followers than me.
Just as an aside, I now realize where the name Windmill Scene comes from and why I thought they might have been from Brixton for a second. The Windmill is a club in Brixton, I believe, where Black Midi, Black Country New Road, Squid, all those bands came up as live acts. They all played at this club. That's why.
That makes sense.
It's called
I mean, a lot of British scenes are named that way.
But
so
it's
that
like
makes
this
sense.
specific venue is kind of iconic among the fans of this scene as like the root of it.
I was gonna joke that we should give it an offensive name like Krautrock.
Well,
Fucking-
it's like
colonizer. Damn.
Limey Rock.
Okay, but that could be
Well,
about American rock too.
But I motion we call it Limey Rock.
Yeah.
Lovely.
I'm not against this. I
Crumpet
should be,
rock.
but I'm
Yo.
not.
Trumpet rock.
Beautiful.
Can't wait to review a moon-shaped pool and talk about the crumpet rock influences.
Wow. I want to kill myself.
Listen, if you meme it enough, it will become a title on Rate Your Music. Okay, we learned that with Hyperpop. If you meme it enough, it will result in a Rate Your Music tag.
It will also
We know what we have to do now is to do exactly that.
I'm just gonna tweet out "big fan of Crumpet Rock" and just give no
And
context.
you will
gotta
be
make
retweeted.
epic collage. That's my favorite
My last-
made up.
I tweeted
rate your
"big
music
fan of
genre.
Crumpet Rock," and then the last thing is the retweet "a grown chimp has the strength of 8 men."
If people don't put that together, they would fail as detectives.
Emily, it's been lovely to having you, and this
Yes.
has been, such a colorful conversation that we've had.
Yes.
Yeah.
Should I do like a quick like reel off of like where people can find me and stuff?
Yes.
Okay. So you can find me at Adequate Emily on Twitter, Adequate Emily on YouTube, all one word. If you need to look up how to spell adequate, Google is your friend.
We will put
Also
a link
sounding it
to
out.
we'll put links to Emily's Twitter and YouTube account in the description of this video, so they will be down there as well.
And usually if I have any other links, like I have a Patreon in my bio on Twitter and in my YouTube. So if you like what you see on the channel, you can always donate there. Pretty much anything else, you'll be able to find me with the same username. As long as you're pretty certain it's me, you're probably set. Like, I don't think anyone's impersonating me yet. But I will say, I won't say that for certain because I will never, you never know.
Exactly.
But yeah, and this was a really fun time. I talked a lot, but I enjoy what I was when I was here, and this was really fun.
Well, that was our discussion of Black Midi's Cavalcade, and we're grateful as ever for Emily joining us. Make sure you go and check out her info in the comment box, in the description box, if you have not already. And now we're going to move on to our second album that we're reviewing today, which is Sweet Trip. Are a kind of like a dream pop, glitch pop, shoegaze band based in San Francisco, and consisting of two main members, Roby and Valerie. I don't know their last names, but Roby and Valerie are the kind of duo who are represented on the very colorful album cover for this record. And so they've been making music together for coming up on, God, it must be coming up on like 25, 30 years. It says they were formed in 1993 online. So they've been around for a while. And they are an interesting example of a band where I've never really kind of seen or heard much critical talk or discussion or hype for this band. However, they are a band that have succeeded in a huge way online and through online music communities, specifically radio music, where their album Velocity Design Comfort, their sophomore record that came out in 2003, is currently the 154th ranked album of all time on that site, with an average of 4.05 from 14,000 ratings. So a massively popular record that, as we kind of had talked about, some of us talked about very briefly in the opening segment, is a record that multiple people here really, really enjoy. And Jake in particular has become a huge fan of Sweet Trip very recently. And so what is particularly notable about this new record is that it is their first studio record in 12 years, since 2009's You Will Never Know Why. And Jake, I know you've been particularly enamored with this band recently. I've set the scene now. Do you want to kind of talk about what this record is, what you think the appeal of this record is, and the sound of this album?
Yeah, I think that, like a lot of bands that I tend to gravitate towards, and I think that this podcast tends to gravitate towards, is that Sweet Trip are a restless band. Like, just by the genre indicators that Tyler listed when he described them, you can pretty much tell that they've never really been comfortable with one sound. And it's hard to label them as even like two genres on any given album. Their previous projects thus far, with the exception of their first one, have all been a combination of multiple different things like Velocity Design Comfort is definitely very heavy into the electronic and IDM kind of earlier parts of their sound that don't necessarily show too much on the following two albums, this one included. But there's certainly the building blocks and the DNA of their sound that they would build upon. It's a very focused album, but it has sort of embellishments of these electronic shoegaze and even like dream pop sort of leanings that it kind of mixes in and does it in this very glitchy, unique way. And I think the best way to describe their music would be colorful. It's, even you take a look at Velocity Design Comfort, it's got a rainbow on it, but that's just sort of the kind of atmosphere that their music creates. It's very occasionally becomes kind of psychedelic on things like You Can Never Know Why, which is definitely more in the indie just like indie rock direction. It's a lot more focused of an album, but it still has a very sort of wide kind of breadth in terms of its scope. And as a result, the career trajectory I can closest compare this to is another band that I'm a really big fan of, and that is Slowdive. There are more than a few parallels between them, not necessarily in sound, even though I would argue that they do share a couple things in common. But this is sort of their album that comes back after a long time of silence. Like, you could view the last couple records as being like Souvlaki, as sort of being Velocity Design Comfort, and something like Pygmalion as being fucking
You will never know why.
Yeah, you'll never know why. So this means that this was their sort of semi self-titled comparison in my analogy, but that's not really all that important. But I think that it's important to know all of the dabblings of Sweet Trip before this, because this album is kind of a synthesis of everything they've ever done. I definitely don't see as much IDM stuff and like glitchy stuff. It isn't as prominent in the like focus as something like Velocity Design Comfort is. But that said, it's just got such a full, rich sound that is so not adherent to anything other than what they're interested in doing on a song by song basis. Some of these songs aren't traditionally structured at all, even if they like have a structure at all. But one of the things that I love about them that is like epitomized here is the fact that like their albums tend to run north of an hour, and they're all paced flawlessly. Like, I am just lost in these incredibly large, vast soundscapes that are constantly switching themselves up. The songs here are so vivid and dynamic, and they constantly change themselves up. There'll be like a break at the end of one song, and then it'll transform into something completely different. They use that glitchy sound to make these songs feel as fully formed and as definitive as humanly possible. And there's such a rich texture to everything on this record. I think there's such a resplendent and joyful atmosphere about it. A lot of the lyrics of all their albums are about like just really being in love, and like being like in love with the idea of art and making music. And this is also something that's very present here, is that there's such an apparent love of the medium. Like, you go and look at pictures of making music over the past couple of years, and like they're just sort of people who are like seen in like a living room playing a guitar, like using like a DAW or something, and just this really grassroots thing. And so the fact that they managed to conjure up these incredible sounding things, especially after all this time, and they haven't seemingly, at least by my account, haven't lost their edge in the slightest, I think is incredibly impressive and super notable. It's just such a it's an album that I've been spinning like in constant rotation with Velocity, just because it has that sort of same initial impact. But this here feels like almost the Sweet Trip album. I don't feel like there's anything missing from this experience. I flip this on and I'm transported to a completely other world. This is, if it has any analogies to what I liked in music last year, it has a similar effect on me that the Slift album Uman did, where the sort of psychedelic soundscapes just sort of instantly put me into another plane. And this is exactly the same thing. There's like, it's like a rush of color and being shot down this psychedelic hall of colors that you've never been able to see before, that the human eye has never been able to experience. It feels like a fucking awakening. And it's just a summary of everything I love about every single genre that they dabble in. And to be quite honest, I haven't loved an album of this ilk this much since Slowdive's self-titled, and I am just head over heels in love with it. I think it's flawless and or near flawless, and I think one of my favorite musical memories that will come from this year is when I drove through a storm listening to Velocity Design Comfort last night, came out on the other end, picked up my girlfriend, and we drove around all over town trying to find something to eat while we blasted the entirety of A Tiny House and Secret Speech's Polar Equals, and it played twice the way through, and we just laid in the back of my car, and then we like went to the top of a fucking parking garage and just like looked at the sky when the rain stopped. And it was the most perfect moment ever. And I will treasure that experience so much, and this album is just it's already just dug its way into me, and I will never let it release its grip on my brain. I adore it.
Jake,
Wow.
Jake, the journey you've had, very quick and whirlwind journey that you've had becoming a Sweet Trip fan recently, has been really heartwarming to me, because I've loved Sweet Trip for a while. I mean, obviously being as online as I am, when there's a band that is celebrated so intensely in a particular online thing that I'm a part of, I want to kind of get the appeal. And fortunately, the appeal of Sweet Trip, I think, is very easy to get. They're an incredibly joyful and wonderful, and the way I would describe their music is almost like sugary, like it has a kind of sweetness and a saccharineness to it that works because there's so much weight in terms of the musicality of what they're doing. Like there's a lot of intricacy in their arrangements. It is very much oriented around that kind of dream poppy, shoegazy interest in creating these kind of beautiful soundscapes for pop songs. But the unpredictability of a lot of their musical arrangements, the immaculate production, I have to say, as well, across all of their records. But I think this might even be the best produced Sweet Trip album as well. I mean, this has, I mean, I've been on a journey of my own with this record over the past week, and I'm basically at the point where I think this is, I mean, Velocity Design Comfort is certainly the most kind of singular and unique and impressive statement that they've made. But I think this is, to echo what you've been saying, might be their most well-rounded album as a whole, and therefore I would say their best or my favorite Sweet Trip album yet, which I was not expecting to be as in love with an album as in love with this album as I am. I consider myself a kind of moderate Sweet Trip fan coming into this record, but having experienced it this week and then reflecting on their other records, I feel such an affection for them that is so imbued, and everything about that is imbued in this record. And there, what is most, I guess, what encapsulates most why this record is such a success is simply the fact that it has so many of their best songs on it, which is just absolutely incredible, especially for the fact that it's a 70 odd minute record, and so many of those highlights are staggered so well across the record. It's also, I think, quite an intense achievement, and of course maybe other people might disagree on how well the band do this, but I think it's quite an immense achievement that this record flows as well as it does for a record that not only is as long as it is, but has such a kind of fractious structure where songs kind of do break apart at certain points and then reform into something new. It feels very much like a patchwork of sound in certain ways, and that could perhaps be interpreted as a flaw of the record, but for me it's been one of the kind of joys of it, is the way that these songs kind of like explore this beautiful sound and then bring that sound to this climactic triumphant point, and then just break apart and then introduce some new element that is completely unexpected but also beautiful in its own way. It's like basically the dream pop equivalent of the hip hop beat switch, all across this record. My favorite example on the album being Chapters, which is one of my favorite Sweet amazing track. But I'll start at the beginning with the song the opening track, Tiny Houses, which is this distorted guitar laden shoegazy triumph.
Fucking
enormous track. It could easily fit on any of their records, but it has a particular punch to it and an edge to it that makes it feel distinct and serves as a great entry into this new world. It's really attention grabbing in all the ways that a great opening track should be. And then it goes into what might be my new favorite Sweet Trip song, Surviving a Smile, which is...
Love it.
It's kind of difficult to explain why I love this song as much as I did, because it's one of the simpler and more straightforward tracks on the record, but it's just so... It has a very simple and beautiful musical idea and executes it so wonderfully that I don't want anything more from it, and it gives me all that I need. It has this bouncy chorus melody that explodes out of these reverbed verse chords that do very much remind me of Slowdive, and are underpinned by a textured drum machine that adds an electro step to the track. I love the way that this synthesizer comes in the back half of this song and kind of wheezes across it, and the whole thing sort of swells, and it's just repeating this beautiful ethereal refrain and melody that is just absolutely blissful. I've played this song at least 24 times this week. I have put this fucker on repeat and just blissed out. It's fantastic. And I touched on a kind of electro aspect of the song and the percussion, and that leads me to another aspect of this band and this record in particular that really elevates it, and that is that the songs have a real heft to them, and the band know when to switch between programmed drums and real ones. And I have to say, the real ones, the drumming on this record fucking knocks. My favorite showcase for that is actually the third track, The Weight of Comfort, which has there's really electric kit work all over top of it, and that drumming is integrated so well into the squelching synthesizer melody and gorgeous guitar ripples. Amazing song. I absolutely adore it. And then we get into a stretch of tracks on this record that is just mind-blowingly good. In Sound, We Found Each Other is an amazing song. It feels like a quintessential Sweet Trip song. I haven't interrogated the lyricism of this record too deeply, but in many ways it feels like a love song to the band itself, like a song of about how the friendship that Roby and Valerie have, and the beauty of that, and the way that that is all found in their music, and their desire to make particular sounds also facilitated that friendship. And it's a beautiful kind of sentiment, and the song itself is just absolutely gorgeous. And I mean, the lyricism in general on this record is uncomplicated. It's quite sentimental. Generally, it's kind of blissful in the way that dream pop lyricism really tries to be, and is all it really needs to be. And with a band like Sweet Trip, you don't really need much more than that. The words simply function as another way of accentuating the lush prettiness of the arrangements. A complaint that I've seen leveled at this band in the past is that the vocals lack presence, but frankly, I think they're perfect, and they serve almost as a source of harmony to the music itself, more than something that's happening on top of it. And they're harmonizing with the melodies of their songs, and they're giving the songs more size and layers and depth in the process of doing that. Valerie's vocal style in particular, and the general tone of the singing and the way it's used, also reminds me of Stereolab, which is not an instrumentally dissimilar band to this one. And in a sense, Sweet Trip serve a similar function now as that band did in the 90s, with a prettier and warmer palette that I think is no doubt a big part of their huge appeal to young audiences in particular. The record hits a golden stretch with the 3-track run of Chapters, Eve Foolery Mill 5, and Snow Purple Treasures, which I think is a 20-minute sequence of maybe the best 20-minute sequence of music of the year, and some of the best music that Sweet Trip have ever made. It is an exhilarating run of songs that sees the band sounding as vital and enthralling as they ever have, without relying on the violent glitch of velocity or the plaintive joys of You Will Never Know Why. This is so much bigger and more densely beautiful and rich than that. Chapters builds waves of shimmering acoustic guitar and synthesizer. Eve Foolery Mill 5 has waves of reverbed radiance that are underpinned by this punching beat that feels like it realizes the atmosphere and intensity that dime a dozen dream pop bands struggle to nail year after year. In particular, in tracks like this, I'm reminded of arguably the best dream pop band of the century so far, which is Beach House. This record is kind of a fusion of the epic grandeur of a record like Bloom and some of those other reference points that I've already kind of touched on. And Sweet Trip just do a great job of making all of these sounds their own thing. I mean, I could go on with this record, but I think I've said plenty at this point. And absolutely remarkable, and I mean, it's not gonna get awards for being the most original or inventive record of the year, but the beauty of a band like Sweet Trip and a record like this is that it doesn't need to be that to be great, and the greatness comes from how great they are at what they do, and how lush and impressive they are at creating these musical soundscapes.
Yeah, completely agree there. It's just such a viscerally, it's like even though it's a big atmosphere album, it's like you said, the tracks have such a weight, such a heft to them that it's just like this album is blissful, but it also has fucking impact. It's fucking enormous and it will hit you like a sledgehammer in the best possible of ways. And that's just what keeps me coming back to it, is that it's almost so formless and fluid that it feels like I'm listening to it for the first time every single time.
Yeah. I'll chime in because my thoughts are brief. This is the most beautiful album released since Parannoul. It except for like one track about halfway through where it sort of indulges in more of that like bleep bloop stuff, which is a great track. Don't get me wrong, but it's just constantly blissful, beautiful, indulgent. It's like eating a wonderful like chocolate ganache and then drinking champagne afterwards and going home and being kind of half drunk and sleeping on like a chaise longue and watching some horribly indulgent, simultaneously like trashy television show like Pretty Little Liars or something, and just feeling happy. You know, that's what this record's like. And that's about all I have to say. It's wonderful.
Checks mark off list, references Pretty Little Liars on Jams and Tea podcast.
Beautiful.
Well, yeah, I don't have terribly complex thoughts either, mainly because a lot of the appeal of this album, I think, is pretty self-evident to anyone who is willing to listen to it. It just, sounds really nice. I found myself personally almost struggling to take notes on it because I was really just like, well, I could just write the same thing 17 times. It sounds pretty.
A little bit.
And I like that it sounds pretty. I did find myself a bit more engaged in like a couple of the strictly instrumental songs. Like I really liked Randfilt and Polar Equals a ton. I particularly like the moment in Polar Equals where it just suddenly stops to give way to this epic guitar part.
Polar Equals is a fucking track. I'm glad you shouted that out. That's a fucking track. Oh God.
Yeah, that track's just awesome. I really love the bass on this album. It all sounds very just bouncy, and it has the perfect sound for whatever it's going for, I thought.
I'll just jump on that to say that I have one note about the bass as well, which is that it's generally excellent as well, but I wanted to in particular shout out the wonderful loping bass line of the track You, which is just one of my favorite bass lines of the year. It has this really nice sense of rhythmic direction to it that really counterpoints or like adds a kind of weighting to the resplendent guitar noise washes that are all over it. It's a really, really nice bit of rhythmic counterpoint. And the record has lots of stuff like that, but that song stood out in that regard for me.
Yeah. I mean, really the only, I don't know, I don't really have much against it outside of the fact that it just kind of, it satisfies one emotion for me, and it does that job well. That's I guess about all I get out of it, really. That I'm like, wow, this is really nice and pretty, and I don't get a whole lot else out of it other than that. But
I will say that
the
fact that this record, a 70-minute primarily dream pop record, doesn't bore you is
yeah, that's a good sign of quality right there.
And I think that's a testament to the fact that Sweet Trip go above and beyond so many dream pop bands. I mean, obviously, it feels reductive to even call them that because there's so much shoegaze guitar on this record and electronic flourishes and stuff. But that's the point. Like, they have so much happening in the mixes of these songs that keeps them interesting, that keeps them satisfying as a headphone listen that
Yeah.
it's this endlessly rewarding thing, even if it is like reasonably, like, even if its appeals are somewhat straightforward and it's and two-dimensional. Maybe the mixes and the sounds and the soundscapes are certainly not two-dimensional. They're thrilling.
I'd never deny the actual instrumental talent of this being anything less than astonishing. Yeah, I enjoy it. I'd say about the whole way through. It's a good album. Perhaps it doesn't, like I kind of made the point of, perhaps it doesn't like itch into that upper echelon of my favorites of the year, but I don't know, it's also fighting an uphill battle with a lot of the particular genre classifications it's in, for me at least, but I don't know, that's kind of how I feel about it. It's good.
That's completely fucking fair, frankly. And if you all get the chance, and like, and if you're not even like fully into it, but even if you are, fucking put this album on the biggest fucking speakers you possibly can, because putting it on in my car, holy shit. Like, yeah, Tyler said it was a good headphone listen, but oh my God.
And I'm not discounting that I wouldn't enjoy some of their earlier work a little more, perhaps.
Oh yeah, the Velocity, definitely. Just because it's more August core.
Yeah, it's the one I've been told about.
Totally. Well, Morgan, love to hear from you on this record.
Yeah, I think it's pretty fucking excellent. I'll start with the drawback, because it's, the one thing I have on it is that I just like, motherfucker is long. And that's not a bad thing, because I'm never bored. It just, I'm kind of exhausted by the end. It's like when you have too much sugary candy, and then you just kind of got like die.
One thing I will say that I think helps it stick the landing with regard to like being a 70-minute album of this type is the fact that, like, as I said, the best tracks in this thing I think are staggered really well throughout the runtime. And also one thing that hasn't been shouted out that I was waiting to see if anyone brought up is the fact that the closer on this album is so fucking amazing.
Oh my
incredible,
God.
Right?
Like,
it's probably my favorite track on the record, the closer.
Yeah. That's
I leave my body during this track. Like, I done what you said, Jake, and listened to it in the car as well. And that was the moment where it felt like I was just gonna like start levitating in my car off of the road and just continue driving into the sun.
I would almost compare it to like a more happy version of the Made We Messed from Drinking Songs in terms of the epic scope.
That song's tethered.
You know what?
Exactly, right?
You know what? I can kind of see that. Yeah.
I see it. Yeah. I do. But yeah, great job on this one, guys, if you're watching this, because I mean, holy shit, I needed an album like this. God damn.
Really? This is gonna be a on repeat record for me this year.
Absolutely. It's just such a great record to throw on when you don't particularly want to be heavier. Yeah, exactly. You just want to have something beautiful to listen to. And that's
2021 albums making me happy. Good job, guys. You've done it. You're doing great, sweetheart.
Yeah.
Is that allowed?
I know, right? I'm just like, I have like 4 albums that I listen to that are in like my top 5 this year, where I'm just like, I just unequivocally feel like I'm on top of the fucking world when listening to this shit. So doing something right.
Hell yeah. All right. Well, favorite tracks and ratings then. We shall go in reverse jams and tea this time, since we did regular order last time. My 3 favorite tracks are obviously Surviving a Smile, one of my favorite songs of the year. I'll also put in, this is going to be so hard. I'll say
it's 14 songs long and all of them are great. Like fucking fuck.
I'll say Eve, Foolery, Mill 5, and At Last a Truth That Is Real. And my least favorite track, if I had to pick one, I'd pick Come Spend the Night. But I think this is a really fucking sensational album, and I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm here for that, man. So my favorite tracks are Surviving a Smile, E Foolery, Mill 5, and At Last A Truth Is Real. It's getting an 8.5 from me. Least favorite track, Fuck You.
Love that song.
Sweet.
It's
Love
my
this
least
one.
favorite track though.
Niles
I see you.
Barkley on this motherfucking record.
My three favorites are the At Last a Truth That Is Real, Surviving a Smile, and Polar Equals. And I would know for least favorite. Give it just a 9.
Favorites: Surviving a Smile, Randlift, and Polar Equals. Least favorite, hard to pick one, I guess. Come Spend the Night. I'll give it a 7.
Well, I'm gonna go out and say, well, not my favorite on the album. Come Spend the Night is absolutely one of my favorite songs on here. Maybe not specifically top 3, just because again there are 14 excellent songs here. But I do want to shout that out because I love that one. That was one that was particularly nice to lay down next to someone too. I also will say, At Last a Truth That Is Real, because yeah. And I will give a shout to In Sound We Found Each Other. And I simply do not have a least favorite, and this gets a 10.
I saw that coming and I'm happy.
Oh, there you go. Well, that is one of our most highest rated new release episodes we've ever done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an average of 8.7, which is just 4 records with a similar rating. Going from top to bottom, Smiling With No Teeth by Genesis Owusu, Forever in Your Heart
Last
by
time
Black
we
Dresses.
had an episode like this.
Ooh.
Right? Yeah, but Forever in Your Heart by Black Dresses, Iridescence by Brockhampton, and get this, Go Farther and Lightness by Gang of Youths.
So this is Jake Core. Let's go. Let's
Beautiful.
go.
Beautiful.
So what are we doing next week?
So next week on the podcast, we're going to be covering the new Japanese Breakfast album, Jubilee. And we're also going to be talking about Wolf Alice's new album, Blue Weekend. So stick around for those. Let us know what you think of those records. Hit us up on the Twitter at JamesTPod. Also coming out before then, we have exciting videos coming. We have a Record Club episode on an album that's very special to us, Great Grandpa's 4 of Arrows, that'll be hitting very soon. And we also have the latest in our ongoing 1991 retrospective series will be hitting really soon, which is going to be on the self-titled record from Temple of the Dog, the band that was made up of members of Soundgarden and members who would go on to comprise Pearl Jam, a very important grunge release that we will be dissecting very soon. So stick around for those. And in the meantime, let us know what you think of the new Black Midi album and the new Sweet Trip album. Hit us up in the comments below. Tell us what you liked or didn't like about those records. What did we get right about those albums? What did we get wrong about those records? If anything, let us know in the comments below. And as always,
Rock Over London, Rock on Chicago, General Electric, Imagination at Work.